I came here to marry you, and you're telling me no? Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway of a ranch house that looked like it had been holding its breath for years, staring at the man who'd summoned her across 1,000 miles, only to refuse her the moment she arrived. Silas Mercer's jaw was set like stone. I made a mistake writing that letter. She had $23 to her name, no family, and nowhere left to run. He had a house full of ghosts and a heart that had stopped beating a decade ago. One of them would have to leave by morning, but neither of them knew what staying would cost. If you want to see how this impossible situation unfolds, stay with me until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wagon rattled to a stop just as the sun broke over the Montana horizon, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold. Clara Whitmore climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel, her dress coated in a fine layer of trail dust. She stood there for a moment, taking in the ranch that was supposed to be her future. It wasn't much to look at. The house was a low, weathered structure with peeling paint and shutters that hung crooked. The barn leaned slightly to one side, as if it were too tired to stand up straight. Fences stretched across the property in uneven lines, some sections missing posts entirely. Everything about the place spoke of neglect, not the kind that comes from laziness, but the kind that comes from not caring anymore. Still, it was more than she'd had in St. Louis. The wagon driver, an older man named Pete, who'd barely spoken the entire journey, handed down her trunk. "You sure about this, miss?" Clara smoothed her skirt and lifted her chin. "I'm sure." She wasn't sure at all. Pete gave her a look that said he knew it, then climbed back onto his seat. "Good luck to you." The wagon pulled away, and Clara was alone. She turned toward the house and saw him for the first time. Silas Mercer stood on the porch, one hand gripping the post like he needed it to stay upright. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so hard. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not welcoming, not angry, just empty. Clara picked up her trunk, lighter than it should have been, holding everything she owned, and walked toward him. "Mr. Mercer," she said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I'm Clara Whitmore." He didn't move, didn't speak. She waited, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. "I got your letter," she continued, trying to keep her voice steady. "You said you needed a wife. I wrote back. You sent money for the train and the wagon. So, here I am." Silas finally moved, but only to shake his head. "You need to leave." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You need to leave," he repeated, his voice flat. "I'll pay for your trip back. You can take the next wagon out tomorrow." She stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. I came all this way, 3 weeks of travel. You wrote to me. You asked." "I made a mistake." The words hit her like a slap. "A mistake," she echoed. "That's right." He turned away, heading for the door. "There's a room inside. You can stay the night. I'll have Pete come back in the morning." "Wait!" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. She climbed the steps, blocking his path. "You wrote to me 4 months ago. I answered. You sent money. You told me to come. And now you're saying it was a mistake?" Silas met her eyes for the first time, and she saw something flicker there. Something that looked almost like pain, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "That's what I'm saying." "Why?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "I sold everything I had to get here. I have no family, no home to go back to. I came because you said you needed someone, and I needed—" She stopped herself, breathing hard. "You can't just send me away like I'm a package that got delivered to the wrong address. I can pay you for the trouble. I don't want your money. I want an explanation." Silas's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he just looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara forced herself not to look away. She'd been looked at plenty in her life, looked down on, looked past, looked at like she was something to be pitied or dismissed. She'd learned to hold her ground. "I can't marry you," he said finally. "I can't give you what you're looking for." "And what am I looking for?" "A husband, a home, a life." He gestured vaguely at the ranch. I don't have any of that to give. You have a house. You have land. You wrote that you needed help running the place. I was wrong. About needing help or about wanting it? He didn't answer. Clara set her trunk down with a thud. Fine. If you won't marry me, then hire me. That got his attention. What? Hire me, she repeated. You clearly need someone to take care of this place. It's falling apart. When's the last time anyone cooked a decent meal in that kitchen? When's the last time those windows were cleaned? I don't need— Yes, you do. She crossed her arms. Pay me wages, room and board. I'll work for you until I've earned enough to figure out what's next. Then I'll leave, and you can go back to letting this place rot. Silas stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. Look, Miss Whitmore, Clara. Clara. He said her name like it cost him something. This isn't a good idea. I don't care if it's a good idea. It's the only idea I have. She picked up her trunk again. So unless you're planning to physically throw me off your property, I suggest you show me where I'm sleeping tonight. For a moment, she thought he might actually do it, grab her trunk, march her back down the road, and leave her there. But instead, he let out a long breath that sounded like defeat. One night, he said, tomorrow you leave. We'll see. He turned without another word and walked into the house. Clara followed, her heart still racing, but her chin held high. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were piled in the sink, some of them growing things that might have once been food. The floor was tracked with mud and grime. Curtains hung limp and gray over windows that barely let in any light. It smelled like old smoke and older grief. Clara set her trunk down and looked around, trying not to let her dismay show. Silas gestured toward a narrow hallway. Room's the second door. Don't touch anything else. What about supper? I don't eat supper. Everyone eats supper. I don't. He moved toward the door. I'll be in the barn if you need anything, which you won't. He left before she could respond. Clara stood in the middle of the filthy kitchen, surrounded by someone else's abandoned life, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She spent the next hour exploring the house, moving carefully like she was walking through a museum of sadness. The main room held a cold fireplace, a sagging couch, and a table buried under old newspapers and unopened mail. The kitchen was a disaster of neglect. Down the hallway, she found the room Silas had mentioned, small, plain, with a bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. There were two other doors, both closed. She didn't open them. She unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and changed into a simpler dress. Then she went back to the kitchen and stared at the mess. If she was going to stay, even just for one night, she couldn't sit in this filth. She started with the dishes, hauling water from the pump outside, heating it on the stove. The work was familiar, grounding. She'd spent years doing this kind of labor, first in her father's house, then in the boarding house where she'd worked after he died. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was spinning. Why had he changed his mind? What had happened between sending that letter and her arrival? She scrubbed a plate clean and set it on the drying rack. Maybe he'd never meant to go through with it. Maybe he'd written the letter in a moment of weakness and regretted it immediately. Maybe he'd hoped she wouldn't come. But he'd sent the money. He'd made arrangements. Claire rinsed another dish, her jaw set. Men were complicated creatures. Her father had taught her that. He'd been a good man, mostly, but he'd carried his own demons, drinking too much, working too little, making promises he couldn't keep. She'd loved him anyway, but she'd learned not to expect consistency. Still, this was different. Silas Mercer wasn't drunk or careless. He was deliberate, cold. Whatever had happened to make him push her away, it wasn't weakness. It was fear. She could see it at the way he held himself, like he was braced for a blow that never came, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, in the way he'd said, "I can't give you what you're looking for," as if he'd already decided what that was without asking. The door creaked open behind her. Clara turned to find Silas standing in the doorway, staring at the half-cleaned kitchen like it was a crime scene. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Dishes. I told you not to touch anything." "You told me not to touch anything else. The dishes aren't anything else. They're dishes. She dried her hands on a rag. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't hardtack or jerky? He didn't answer. That's what I thought. She moved toward the pantry, pulling open the door. It was mostly bare. Some flour, a few cans of beans, a jar of something that might have been preserves once. I can make something with this. It won't be fancy, but it'll be food. I said I don't eat supper, and I said everyone eats supper. She pulled out the flour and set it on the counter. You can either sit down and eat what I make, or you can go back to the barn and let it go to waste. Your choice. Silas stood there for a long moment, clearly torn between ordering her to stop and just walking away. Finally, he did what she was starting to realize was his default. He turned and left without a word. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Then she got to work. By the time the sun had fully set, Clara had managed to produce something resembling a meal: biscuits that were only slightly burned, beans with a bit of salt pork she'd found hanging in the pantry, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. She set it all out on the table, cleared a space for 2 plates, and sat down to wait. Silas didn't come. She waited 20 minutes, then 30. Fine. She ate alone, the silence of the house pressing in around her. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was the kind that felt like it was listening, waiting for something to break it. She finished her meal, cleaned up, and was just putting the last dish away when the door opened again. Silas walked in, saw the plate she'd left for him on the table, and stopped. It's probably cold by now, Clara said without turning around. But it's there if you want it. She heard him move, heard the scrape of the chair, heard the clink of a fork against the plate. She allowed herself a small smile. When she finally turned around, he was eating, slowly, methodically, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enjoy it. It's just beans and biscuits, she said, sitting down across from him. Nothing special. He didn't respond, but he kept eating. Clara poured herself more coffee and watched him. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, lines around his eyes, a weariness that went deeper than just lack of sleep. He looked like a man who'd been holding himself together by sheer will for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to relax. How long have you been out here alone? She asked. Silas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Long enough. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Fair enough. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the scrape of forks and the distant howl of wind outside. Why did you really write that letter? Clara asked finally. Silas set down his fork. I told you. It was a mistake. But why did you write it in the first place? People don't just wake up one day and decide to send for a mail-order bride for no reason. Maybe I did. I don't believe you. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw something crack in that carefully controlled expression. Doesn't matter what you believe, you're leaving tomorrow. What if I don't want to leave? That's not your choice. It's exactly my choice. Clara leaned forward. You can't force me to go. I'm not your property. I'm not anyone's property. And if I want to stay and work for wages, that's my right. I won't pay you. Then I'll work for room and board. Why? The word came out almost like a plea. Why would you want to stay here? This place is... He gestured around the room. Look at it. It's falling apart. I'm falling apart. There's nothing here for you. Maybe I'm not looking for much. You should be. Well, I'm not. Clara held his gaze. I came here with no illusions, Mr. Mercer. I'm 26 years old, I have no family, no prospects, and no future waiting for me anywhere. When I got your letter, I saw a chance at something, maybe not love, maybe not even happiness, but at least a place where I could be useful, where I could build something, and I'm not ready to give that up just because you got cold feet. Silas pushed his plate away. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. No. Why not? Because it's none of your business. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You've been here for 6 hours. You don't get to waltz in and start asking questions like you have a right to know my life. You're right, Claire said calmly. I don't have a right. But if you want me to leave, you're going to have to give me a reason that's more than just it was a mistake, because that's not good enough. They stared at each other across the table, the air crackling with tension. Finally, Silas turned away. Do what you want. Stay. Leave. I don't care. But don't expect anything from me." "I won't." He walked out, and this time Clara let him go. She sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the cold coffee in her cup and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But she didn't pack her trunk. Clara woke before dawn, her body still on the rhythm of the boarding house where she'd worked for the last 3 years. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and made her way to the kitchen. The house was silent. Silas's door, one of the closed ones she hadn't investigated, remained shut. She started a fire in the stove, put on coffee, and began taking stock of what needed to be done. The list was long, overwhelming actually, but she'd learned a long time ago that the only way to tackle something overwhelming was to start with one small thing and keep going. She chose the windows. By the time the sun came up, she'd scrubbed 3 of them clean, letting light pour into the main room for what looked like the first time in years. The difference was startling. With the sunlight came clarity. She could see just how bad the neglect was, but she could also see the bones of something that had once been cared for. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Silas standing in the hallway, staring at the clean windows like they'd personally offended him. "Morning," Clara said. He grunted something that might have been a greeting and moved toward the coffee pot. "I made breakfast," she added. "Eggs and toast. It's on the table." He poured himself coffee but didn't sit down. Clara waited. "I thought you'd be gone," he said finally. "I told you I wasn't leaving. I also told you I don't need help. And I told you I don't care." She wrung out her rag and moved to the next window. "You can pretend I'm not here if that makes it easier. I'll just keep doing what needs to be done." Silas stood there for a long moment, coffee cup in hand, looking like he was trying to solve a problem with no good answer. Then he sat down at the table and ate the breakfast she'd made without another word. Clara counted it as a victory. The days developed a rhythm, though calling it that felt generous. It was more like a careful dance around each other, both of them pretending the other wasn't there while being hyper-aware of every movement. Clara worked from sunup to sundown. She cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed, scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, aired out the rooms. She cooked meals that Silas ate without comment, leaving his empty plate as the only acknowledgement that she existed. She mended curtains, beat rugs, organized the pantry. Silas, for his part, did his best to avoid her. He left before she woke and came back after dark. He took his meals in silence and disappeared into the barn or out to the fields immediately after. He never said thank you, never asked her to stop, never acknowledged the transformation happening around him. But he noticed. She could tell by the way his eyes would catch on a clean surface, or the way he'd pause in a doorway as if seeing the room for the first time. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she'd catch him watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. On the 4th day, Clara decided to tackle the broken shutter on her bedroom window. It had been banging in the wind since she arrived, keeping her up at night. She'd asked Silas about it once, and he'd said he'd get to it. He hadn't. So she found a hammer and some nails in the barn and decided to do it herself. She was halfway up the ladder, balancing awkwardly while trying to hold the shutter in place, when she heard his voice behind her. "What the hell are you doing?" Clara didn't startle. She'd learned he had a habit of appearing out of nowhere. "Fixing the shutter." "Get down from there." "I've almost got it." "Clara, get down." The use of her first name surprised her enough that she looked down at him. He was standing at the base of the ladder, his expression somewhere between angry and alarmed. "It's fine," she said. "I just need to—" The ladder shifted. Clara's stomach dropped as she felt herself start to fall. She had just enough time to think this is going to hurt before strong hands caught her, steadying the ladder and her at the same time. Silas had moved so fast she hadn't seen him coming. His hands were on her waist, holding her in place, his face level with her ribs. "Don't move," he said, his voice tight. Clara froze. Slowly, carefully, he guided her down, one rung at a time, until her feet were back on solid ground. But he didn't let go immediately. For a moment they just stood there, his hands still on her waist, both of them breathing harder than they should have been. Then Silas stepped back like he'd been burned. "That was stupid," he said. Clara's heart was hammering, though she wasn't sure if it was from the near fall or from the way he'd looked at her just then. "I had it under control." "You were about to break your neck." "I was fine." "You were careless." He grabbed the hammer from her hand. Don't do that again. Then fix it yourself. I will. He climbed the ladder with practiced ease and had the shutter secured in less than 5 minutes. Clara watched from the ground, arms crossed, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. When he came back down, she said, "Thank you." He didn't respond, just walked away with the hammer. But the next morning, when she opened her bedroom door, there was a pair of work gloves sitting on the floor. They were worn but clean, the leather soft from use. Clara picked them up, ran her thumb over the stitching, and smiled. On the 7th day, Clara found the garden. She'd been exploring the property, learning the lay of the land. The barn was solid but needed repairs. The fences were a patchwork of fixes and failures. The field stretched out in all directions, most of them lying fallow. And behind the house, hidden by overgrown grass and wild brambles, was what had once been a garden. Clara pushed through the tangle of weeds and stood in the middle of it, trying to imagine what it had looked like before. There were remnants, rows that had once been straight, a trellis collapsed under its own weight, the skeleton of what might have been a rose bush. Someone had cared for this place, had put time and love into making it beautiful, and then they'd abandoned it. She was still standing there, lost in thought, when Silas appeared at the edge of the clearing. "Stay out of there," he said. Clara turned to face him. "Why?" "Just do it." "Was this your wife's garden?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Silas's expression went completely blank. "How did you—" "There's a photograph in the main room," Clara said quietly. "On the mantel. A woman and a little girl. I saw it when I was cleaning." She'd tried not to look too closely at it, had tried to give him privacy, but it was impossible not to notice. The woman in the photograph had been beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The girl had been maybe 4 or 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Neither of them looked like they belonged in the sad, silent house. "Don't," Silas said. His voice was low, dangerous. "Don't ask about them. Don't touch that garden. Don't—" He stopped himself, jaw working. "Just stay out of it." "All right," Claire said. She meant it. She did. But as she walked away, she couldn't stop thinking about that garden, about the care that had gone into it, and the deliberate neglect that had killed it. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about everything she'd learned. Silas had lost his wife and daughter. That much was clear. And whatever had happened to them, it had broken something in him so completely that he'd spent, how long? Years? Trying to bury it under silence and distance. The letter he'd written to her had been an attempt to crawl out of that hole. And then something had changed. Some realization or fear had pulled him back down, and now he was trapped between wanting connection and being terrified of it. Clara knew that feeling. She'd spent years after her father's death trying to decide if it was safer to be alone or to risk letting someone in again. She'd chosen loneliness because it was predictable. It couldn't hurt her worse than she'd already been hurt. But lying there in that narrow bed, in a house that wasn't hers, working for a man who didn't want her there, she realized she was tired of safe. She wanted messy. She wanted complicated. She wanted real. Even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. The following days, Clara kept her word and stayed away from the garden. But she didn't stop working. She moved through the house like a quiet storm, fixing and cleaning and restoring. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice at first, Silas started to soften. Not in any obvious way. He still didn't talk much. Still ate in silence, still disappeared for hours at a time. But there were small things. He started coming in for breakfast. Started leaving his boots by the door so she didn't have to sweep up mud. Started saying morning when he saw her, and night when he turned in. He fixed the loose floorboard in the hallway that she'd been stepping around. He brought in extra wood for the stove without being asked. He stopped telling her she should leave. And one evening, about 2 weeks after she'd arrived, he actually sat down at the table after supper instead of disappearing immediately. Clara was washing dishes, and she could feel him watching her. "You don't have to do all this," he said finally. She glanced over her shoulder. "Do what?" "All of it. The cooking, the cleaning. You're working yourself to death." "I like to stay busy." "Why?" Clara turned back to the dishes, considering the question. "Because it feels good to fix things, to take something broken and make it useful again." Silas was quiet for a moment. Is that what you think you're doing here? Fixing things? Maybe. What if some things can't be fixed? Clara dried her hands and turned to face him fully. Then at least I tried. That's more than most people can say. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're stubborn. So are you. I know. It was the closest they'd come to a real conversation since the day she'd arrived. Clara sat down across from him, her heart beating a little faster than it should. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer. What changed between writing that letter and me getting here? Silas leaned back in his chair, his eyes going distant. I realized I was being selfish. Selfish how? By asking someone to come into this. He gestured around the room. I thought I could just start over. Pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. Build something new on top of all the broken pieces. He shook his head. But you can't do that. The broken pieces are still there, and it's not fair to ask someone else to cut themselves on them. Clara's chest tightened. What if I don't mind the broken pieces? You should, but I don't. Why not? Because everyone's broken, Silas. Everyone's carrying something. The difference is whether you let it bury you or whether you figure out how to carry it and still move forward. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was real. You really believe that? I have to, Clara said quietly. Otherwise, what's the point? Silas didn't answer, but something in his eyes shifted, just a fraction, just enough to let a little light in. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara thought maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice in staying. 3 weeks in, the first real storm hit. Clara woke to the sound of thunder so loud it shook the house. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like something alive. She pulled on her robe and hurried to the main room, checking for leaks. She found Silas already up, standing by the window and staring out at the deluge. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough. He grabbed his coat. I need to check the barn, make sure the horses are secure. I'll come with you. No, stay inside. Silas! Stay inside, Clara. But she didn't listen. She grabbed her shawl and followed him out into the storm. The rain was cold and brutal, soaking through her clothes in seconds. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, but she pushed forward, following Silas's broad back toward the barn. They made it inside just as a branch crashed down where they'd been standing moments before. Silas whirled on her, furious. I told you to stay in the house, and I told you I'm not good at following orders. They stood there, both of them dripping wet, breathing hard, glaring at each other. The horses shifted nervously in their stalls, and the wind screamed against the barn walls. Then Silas did something Clara didn't expect. He laughed. It was a rough, rusty sound, like something that hadn't been used in years. But it was real. You're impossible, he said. I've been told. He shook his head, still smiling, actually smiling, and grabbed a blanket from a hook on the wall. Here. You're freezing. He wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. Clara looked up at him, water dripping from her hair, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For laughing. Silas's smile faded, but not in a bad way. It transformed into something gentler, sadder. I forgot how. I noticed. Clara. He stopped, like he wasn't sure what he wanted to say. Then he reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. You should go back inside. Get dry. But neither of them moved. The storm raged around them, and the barn creaked and groaned, and Clara realized that something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be unshifted, and she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. Maybe both. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, expecting to find it empty. Instead, she found Silas cooking breakfast. He looked up when she entered, almost sheepish. I thought I'd give you a break. Clara blinked. You're cooking. I can cook, I just usually don't. Why not? He shrugged. Didn't seem worth it for just me. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Clara sat down at the table, her throat tight. Well, I appreciate it. They ate together in comfortable silence, or at least more comfortable than it had been, and when they were done, Silas didn't immediately disappear. Instead, he said, "There's something I want to show you." He led her outside, past the barn, out toward the fields. Clara followed, curious and a little nervous. They stopped at the edge of what she'd thought was just another overgrown patch of land. But looking closer, she could see the remnants of structure, rows that had once been intentional, markers that meant something. "This was her garden," Silas said quietly. "My wife's. Anna." He said her name like it hurt. "She loved roses, grew dozens of them, every color you can imagine." Clara stood beside him, not saying anything, letting him speak. "After she died, I couldn't touch it, couldn't look at it, so I let it go to hell." He kicked at a weed. "I let everything go to hell." "What happened to her?" Clara asked gently. Silas was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Fever. It came through one winter, took half the county. Anna and my daughter, Emma, they were gone in 3 days." Clara's heart cracked. "I'm so sorry." "I tried to save them, called for the doctor, did everything he said. But it wasn't enough." His voice was rough. "Nothing was enough. It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "I brought them out here. This ranch, this life, it was what I wanted. Anna would have been happy anywhere, but I wanted to build something, prove something, and it killed them." "No," Clara said firmly. "Fever killed them. Not you, not this place. Just bad luck and bad timing. Doesn't feel like a difference. But there is one." She moved closer, close enough that she could see the lines of pain etched into his face. "You loved them. You did everything you could, and when it wasn't enough, you survived. That's not guilt, Silas. That's grief, and you're allowed to feel it without punishing yourself forever." His jaw clenched. "I don't know how to stop." "Then let me help." "How?" Clara took a breath, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "Let me restore the garden, not to replace what was there, but to honor it, to show that beauty can grow again, even after loss." Silas stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve to have something beautiful in your life again, and so do I." For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay." And Clara knew, standing there in the ruins of someone else's dream, that she'd just made a promise she intended to keep, even if it broke her heart in the process. Clara started on the garden the next morning, armed with a pair of shears she'd found rusting in the barn, and a determination that surprised even her. The work was harder than she'd anticipated. Years of neglect had turned the plot into a battlefield of thorns and weeds, roots so thick they seemed determined to hold onto the earth forever. She worked through the morning, her hands blistering despite the gloves Silas had given her. Sweat dripped down her back, and her shoulders ached from pulling and cutting and digging. But she didn't stop. Around noon, she heard footsteps behind her. "You're going to kill yourself out here," Silas said. Clara straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "I'm fine." He surveyed the small section she'd managed to clear, then looked at the vast tangle that remained. "At this rate, you'll be done sometime next year." "Then I guess I'll be here next year." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. He disappeared into the barn and returned a few minutes later with another pair of shears and heavy work gloves. Clara stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Helping." He knelt down beside her and started attacking a particularly vicious bramble. "Unless you'd rather do this alone." "No," Clara said quickly. "No, I wouldn't." They worked side by side in silence. The only sounds, the snap of cutting shears and the rustle of dead vegetation. It was different from the careful distance they'd maintained in the house. Out here, their shoulders almost touched. Their hands brushed when they reached for the same branch, and neither of them pulled away. After a while, Silas said, "She used to spend hours out here. Emma would help, mostly by making a mess and getting dirt everywhere." His voice was soft, almost wondering, like he was surprised to find himself talking. I'd come back from the fields and find them both covered in soil, laughing about something I didn't understand. Clara kept working, giving him space to continue or stop as he needed. I haven't thought about that in years, he admitted. The good parts. I only let myself remember the end. That's easier, Clara said. The good parts hurt more. Yeah, he pulled up a stubborn root. They do. They kept clearing until the sun started to sink, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When Clara finally stood up, her back screaming in protest, she looked at what they'd accomplished. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, maybe a quarter of the garden cleared, but it was a start. Silas stood beside her, wiping dirt from his hands. Tomorrow we'll need to turn the soil, get it ready for planting. Tomorrow, Clara agreed and tried not to smile at the fact that he'd said we. That night, over a simple supper of stew and bread, Silas asked, "What made you answer my letter?" Really? Claire had been waiting for this question. I told you, I had nowhere else to go. That's not the whole truth. She set down her spoon, considering how honest to be. No, it's not. The truth is, I was tired of being invisible, of working in that boarding house, serving other people's meals, cleaning other people's messes, and knowing that's all I'd ever be. When I got your letter, I thought maybe I could be something more. Someone's wife, someone's partner, someone who mattered. You matter, Silas said quietly. Do I? You're sitting here, aren't you? Turning my life upside down. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He looked at her for a long moment. I haven't decided yet. But there was something in his eyes that made Clara think maybe he had, and the answer wasn't what he wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost like partnership. They worked the garden together in the mornings, Silas showing Clara which areas got the most sun, where water pooled after rain, which sections of soil were richest. He taught her about the land with a patience she hadn't expected, and she listened with an eagerness that seemed to surprise him. In the afternoons, they'd split up, Silas tending to the ranch work, Clara managing the house. But it wasn't the same lonely separation as before. Now, when he came in for supper, he'd tell her about a fence that needed mending or a coyote he'd spotted near the southern pasture, and she'd tell him about a recipe she wanted to try or a tear in the parlor curtain she'd patched. Small things, normal things, the kind of things people who shared a life talked about. One afternoon, Clara was beating rugs in the yard when a wagon appeared on the road. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun as it approached. Visitors were rare. In the months she'd been there, exactly no one had come by. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and a man climbed down. He was well-dressed, probably in his 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from money and power. His eyes swept over the property, with the assessing gaze of someone who knew how to calculate value. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for Silas Mercer." "He's out in the north field," Clara said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, covered in dust with her sleeves rolled up. "Can I help you with something? You must be the new housekeeper I heard about." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Victor Hale. I own the Triple H Ranch about 15 miles north of here." Clara had heard the name. Silas had mentioned the Triple H once or twice, always with a certain edge to his voice. "I'll go get him," she said. "No need. I can wait." Victor gestured to the porch. "Mind if I sit?" "It's not my porch." "Isn't it?" He climbed the steps anyway, settling into the chair like he owned it. "Word in town is you came here as a mail-order bride. That true?" Clara's spine stiffened. "That's none of your business." "Fair enough. But if you're staying on, you should know what kind of man you're working for." "I know exactly what kind of man I'm working for." "Do you?" Victor leaned back, studying her. "Has he told you about the water rights dispute? About the fact that this ranch is barely holding on? About the debts?" Clara kept her expression neutral, even as her stomach dropped. "Like I said, Mr. Hale, if you have business with Silas, you can discuss it with him." Before Victor could respond, Silas appeared around the side of the house. He stopped when he saw the visitor, his entire body going rigid. "Hale," he said flatly, "what do you want?" Victor stood, all easy charm. "Just being neighborly, Mercer. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're managing." "I'm managing fine." Are you? Victor's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Silas. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're working yourself to death trying to keep this place afloat. There's no shame in admitting when you're in over your head. I'm not in over my head. Your fence line is falling apart. Your cattle are getting onto my land. And word is you're 2 months behind on your bank payment. Victor spread his hands. I'm here to offer you a way out. I'll buy the ranch. Fair price. You can take the money, start fresh somewhere else. I'm not selling. Silas, be reasonable. I said no. Silas's voice was like iron. This is my land, my home, and you can go to hell before I sell it to you. Victor's friendly expression hardened. You're making a mistake. It's my mistake to make. What about her? Victor nodded toward Clara. You dragging her down with you? Because when this place goes under, and it will, she'll have nothing. Again. Silas took a step forward, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually hit the other man. Get off my property. I'm going. Victor walked to his wagon, then paused. But the offer stands. And when you change your mind, and you will, you know where to find me. He drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in his wake. Clara waited until the wagon was out of sight before asking, Is what he said true? About the debts? Silas wouldn't look at her. It's complicated. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting. He turned to walk away. Silas, wait. Clara followed him. If you're in trouble, I deserve to know. I'm working this land too. I have a stake in... You don't have a stake in anything. The words came out harsh, desperate. You're working for room and board, remember? This isn't your ranch. It's not your problem. Then whose problem is it? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man drowning and refusing to grab the rope. Maybe I don't want the rope. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Clara could see the fear in his eyes now, the shame, the pride that was eating him alive. Talk to me, she said more quietly. Please. Silas ran a hand through his hair, the fight draining out of him. There's a drought coming. Everyone can feel it, and if it hits like they're saying it will, I won't be able to grow enough feed for the cattle. I'll have to sell them, and without the cattle, I can't make the loan payments. The bank will foreclose, and Hale will buy the property for pennies on the dollar. He laughed bitterly. So yeah, he's right. I'm sinking, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. There's always something you can do. Like what? Pray for rain? Dig a well with my bare hands? Like fight. Clara moved closer. Like not giving up just because things are hard. You think I wanted to end up in a boarding house, scrubbing floors for pennies? You think that was my dream? But I survived because I didn't quit. And you don't strike me as a quitter, Silas Mercer. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to feel like the world is ending and there's no point in going on. But I also know that as long as you're breathing, there's a choice. You can lie down and let it crush you, or you can stand up and fight back. And if I lose anyway, then at least you lose on your feet. Silas looked at her with something that might have been admiration or might have been desperation. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Victor offered you something, didn't he? Before I came back. He suggested I should know what I was getting into. He'll try again. He's got a daughter back east looking for a suitable match, but he's not above taking a wife himself if the opportunity presents. Silas's jaw tightened. He's a predator, Clara, and he sees weakness. Then we won't show him any. We? Clara met his eyes. We. Something shifted in Silas's expression then, something that looked almost like hope. The next Sunday, Silas surprised her by asking if she wanted to go into town. What for? Clara asked, looking up from the bread dough she was kneading. Supplies, and I figured you might want to see something other than this ranch for a change. It was the first time he'd suggested they do anything together that wasn't work-related. Clara tried not to read too much into it. I'd like that, she said. The ride into town took about an hour. They sat side by side on the wagon bench, close enough that their shoulders bumped with every rut in the road. Silas pointed out landmarks as they went, the creek where he used to fish, the hill where Emma had once found a bird's nest, The turn where Anna's wagon had gotten stuck in the mud and she'd made him push while she drove. He told the stories casually, like they didn't cost him anything. But Clara knew better. Each memory was a gift, carefully unwrapped and offered up for her to hold. The town itself was small, just a main street with a general store, a bank, a church, and a saloon. People stopped what they were doing when Silas and Clara rolled past, their eyes curious and not particularly welcoming. "They're staring," Clara murmured. "They always stare. Small town. Nothing better to do." Silas parked the wagon in front of the general store and helped Clara down. His hand lingered on her waist just a moment longer than necessary, and she felt heat creep up her neck. Inside, the store was cramped and cluttered, smelling of flour and tobacco and leather. A woman behind the counter looked up when they entered, her eyes widening. "Silas Mercer, as I live and breathe." "Mrs. Patterson." Silas nodded. "Need to stock up on some supplies." Mrs. Patterson's gaze slid to Clara, her expression cooling. "And who might this be?" "Clara Whitmore," Clara said before Silas could answer. "I'm working at the ranch." "Working." Mrs. Patterson's tone made it clear what she thought of that arrangement. "I see." Clara felt Silas tense beside her. She touched his arm lightly, a silent message to let it go. They gathered what they needed: flour, sugar, coffee, nails, wire, while Mrs. Patterson watched with thinly veiled disapproval. When they brought everything to the counter, she tallied it up with exaggerated care. "That'll be $14.30. Silas pulled out his wallet, counted out the bills, and handed them over. Mrs. Patterson made a show of holding each one up to the light, checking for forgery before finally accepting them. "Heard Victor Hale was out your way," she said as she bagged the supplies. "Word travels fast." "It does when it's interesting." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "He was in here just yesterday, talking about making you a very generous offer for your land." "Mrs. Patterson, with all due respect, my business is my business." Of course, of course. I'm just saying, in times like these, a smart man knows when to fold. Good thing I've never been accused of being smart." Silas grabbed the bags and headed for the door. Clara followed, feeling the weight of Mrs. Patterson's stare on her back. Outside, Silas loaded the supplies into the wagon with more force than necessary. Clara waited until he was done before speaking. "She's a piece of work. She's a gossip and a busybody, and she's probably already spreading stories about us. Let her. I don't care what she thinks." "You should. In a town this size, reputation matters." "Then we'll give them something worth talking about." Silas turned to her, surprised. "What?" Clara stepped closer, close enough that anyone watching would have no doubt about what they were seeing. "We'll show them that we're a team, that we're not ashamed of whatever arrangement we have. Let them talk. Let them speculate. As long as we know the truth, what does it matter?" For a moment, Silas just looked at her. Then slowly, he smiled. "Your trouble, you know that?" "I've been told." They were about to climb back onto the wagon when a voice called out behind them. "Well, well, if it isn't the Hermit of Montana!" Clara turned to see a man approaching, tall and lean, with a crooked smile and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He looked about Silas's age, maybe a little younger, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. Silas's expression transformed into something Clara hadn't seen before, genuine pleasure. "Jack Morrison, what the hell are you doing here?" "Could ask you the same thing. Heard you'd become a recluse." "I prefer the term selectively social." Jack laughed and pulled Silas into a rough hug, slapping his back. When they separated, his eyes landed on Clara with open curiosity. "And who's this?" "Clara Whitmore," Silas said. "She's helping out at the ranch." "Helping out?" Jack's grin widened. "That what we're calling it now?" "Jack, relax. I'm just teasing." He turned to Clara, sweeping into an exaggerated bow. "Jack Morrison, at your service. Oldest friend of this grumpy bastard, though he's been avoiding me for the better part of a decade." "I haven't been avoiding you. You haven't been accepting my invitations either." "I've been busy." "Yeah, being miserable." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "Good to see you're finally coming out of your cave. And with excellent company, I might add." Clara liked him immediately. There was something genuine in his teasing, something that said he cared about Silas despite the distance between them. How long are you in town? Silas asked. Just passing through, heading up to Helena for business. Jack's expression turned serious. But I heard some things, Silas. About the ranch? About Hale circling like a vulture? Is it as bad as they say? Silas's jaw tightened. I'm handling it. That's what I'm afraid of. You handling it alone. Jack looked between Silas and Clara. Look, I know you've got your pride, but if you need help, financial or otherwise, you know I'm good for it. I'm not taking your charity. It's not charity, it's friendship. There's a difference. Jack, just think about it. Promise me that much. Silas was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I'll think about it. Good. Jack's smile returned. Now, how about you introduce me properly to this lady who's managed to drag you out of your hole? They ended up at the saloon, which shocked Clara more than it probably should have. Silas had barely been willing to come into town at all a month ago, and now here he was, sitting at a table with his oldest friend, actually relaxed. Jack regaled them with stories of his travels, business ventures in Denver, a near miss with a bear in Wyoming, a woman in Cheyenne who'd tried to marry him 3 times. He had a gift for storytelling, his hands moving expressively, his voice rising and falling with perfect timing. And Silas laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from deep in his chest and made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Clara watched him, something warm blooming in her chest. This was what he'd been like before, she realized, before grief had carved him hollow, funny, engaged, alive. So, how did you two meet? Jack asked, sipping his whiskey. Clara and Silas exchanged a glance. Mail-order bride situation, Clara said bluntly. He wrote a letter, I answered, I showed up, and he tried to send me packing. Jack nearly choked on his drink. You what? I changed my mind, Silas said defensively. Changed your mind about getting married or changed your mind about sending her away? Both, neither. It's complicated. Clearly. Jack looked at Clara with new respect. And you stayed anyway? I'm stubborn. I can see that. I like her already, Silas. Yeah, well, don't like her too much. The words came out sharper than Silas probably intended, and Jack's eyebrows shot up. Clara felt heat creep into her cheeks. Easy there, friend, Jack said, grinning. I'm just making conversation. But something had shifted in the air between them. Silas was staring at his glass, his jaw tight, and Clara realized with a jolt what that edge in his voice had been. Jealousy. Jack, perceptive as always, changed the subject. So what's the plan for fighting off Hale? Because I'm assuming you do have a plan and aren't just going to let him steamroll you. I'm working on it, Silas said. Work faster. Men like Hale don't give up. They see something they want and they take it, by force if necessary. He can't force me to sell. No, but he can make your life hell until you want to. Cut off your water access. Spread rumors that'll make it impossible to get credit. Hell, I've heard stories of him running cattle through other people's fields, trampling crops, claiming it was an accident. Jack leaned forward. I'm serious, Silas. Watch your back. I will. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting to easier topics, mutual friends, changes in the territory, the possibility of statehood. But Clara couldn't shake the worry that had settled in her gut. Victor Hale wasn't just a threat to the ranch. He was a threat to everything they were building. And if Silas lost this place, what would happen to them? On the ride home, Silas was quiet. The easy mood from the saloon had evaporated, replaced by the familiar tension. Jack seems nice, Clara offered. He is. Too nice sometimes. Thinks everyone's problems can be solved with enough money and goodwill. Can they? No. They rode in silence for a while, the sun sinking low on the horizon. Then Clara said, For what it's worth, I don't think you should be too proud to accept help if you need it. It's not about pride. Then what is it about? Silas was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, The last time I asked for help, really asked, not just accepted what was offered, it was when Anna and Emma were sick. I went to every doctor, every person who claimed they could heal. I begged Clara. I got on my knees and begged anyone who might save them. His voice cracked. And they died anyway, so excuse me if I don't have a lot of faith in asking for help. Clara's throat tightened. That wasn't your fault? Feels like it was. But it wasn't, and shutting everyone out won't bring them back. It'll just make you die a little more every day until there's nothing left. He looked at her then, his eyes raw. Maybe that's easier. Easier than what? Than this. Than caring again. Than risking... He stopped himself. Then risking what? Clara pressed. But Silas just shook his head and turned his attention back to the road. When they got back to the ranch, the sun had set completely. Silas helped Clara down from the wagon, and this time his hands definitely lingered. She could feel the heat of his palms through her dress, could see the war happening behind his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "For today. For including me." "You're part of this now," Silas said. "Whether I planned it or not. Is that a good thing?" He looked at her for a long moment, his thumb brushing almost unconsciously against her waist. "Ask me again in a month." But the way he was looking at her said he already knew the answer. They unloaded the supplies together, moving around each other in the comfortable choreography they'd developed. When everything was put away, Clara started on supper while Silas went to check on the horses. He came back just as she was setting the table, and they ate in companionable silence. But there was something different now, an awareness that hummed between them like electricity. After supper, instead of disappearing to the barn like he usually did, Silas stayed. He helped Clara wash the dishes, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body. Their hands brushed in the soapy water and neither of them pulled away. "Clara," he said quietly. "Yes?" "I'm glad you stayed. I haven't said that yet, but I am." Clara's heart stuttered. "Me too. Even though I'm difficult and broken and probably going to lose everything?" "Especially because of that." He turned to face her fully, water dripping from his hands. "Why?" "Because difficulty and brokenness, I understand. Perfection scares me. But this?" She gestured between them. "This feels real." Silas reached out slowly, like he was giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "Neither do I. I might mess this up. You probably will. I probably will too." "That doesn't scare you?" Clara smiled. "Terrifies me, but I'm doing it anyway." For a moment she thought he might kiss her. He leaned in, his eyes dropping to her lips, his breath mingling with hers. But at the last second, he pulled back. "I should..." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "It's late." Disappointment crashed through Clara, but she nodded. "Good night, Silas." "Good night." He left, and Clara stood in the kitchen, her hand pressed against her cheek where his fingers had been, and wondered how much longer they could dance around what was growing between them. 3 days later, Victor Hale came back. Clara was in the garden, carefully transplanting some wildflowers she'd found growing by the creek, when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see Victor climbing down, carrying a bouquet of store-bought flowers that looked absurdly out of place against the rough Montana landscape. "Miss Whitmore," he said, approaching with that same calculated charm. "I was hoping I'd find you." Clara stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Hale, Silas isn't here." "I know. I came to see you." That stopped her. "Why?" "Because I think we got off on the wrong foot the other day." He held out the flowers. "I wanted to apologize for being so blunt about Silas's situation. It wasn't my place." Clara didn't take the flowers. "You weren't wrong, though, were you? About the debts?" "No. But I could have been more tactful." He set the flowers down on a nearby fence post. "I also wanted to extend an invitation. I'm having a dinner party next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just some neighbors and friends. I'd be honored if you'd attend." "Both of us?" "Of course. Though if Silas is too proud to come, I'd still like you to be there. You shouldn't be isolated out here." Clara crossed her arms. "What are you really after, Mr. Hale?" Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Direct. I like that." "The truth?" "I'm offering you options, Miss Whitmore. Silas is a good man, but he's drowning. And when this place goes under, and it will, you're going to need somewhere to land. I'm simply making sure you know there are alternatives." "Alternatives like what?" "Like a position at my ranch. Housekeeper, if you prefer to keep it professional. Or, he paused meaningfully. "Something more, if you're amenable." Clara's stomach turned. I'm not interested in either. You haven't heard my offer yet. I don't need to. I'm staying here. Even if it means going down with the ship. Even then. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But when you change your mind, and you will, my door is open. He tipped his hat and left, taking his flowers with him. Clara stood in the garden, her hands shaking with anger, and realized that Victor Hale wasn't just threatening the ranch. He was threatening her place in it. And if she didn't find a way to help Silas fight back, they were both going to lose everything. That night, she waited until after supper to bring it up. Hale came by today, she said casually, scrubbing a pot. Silas's head snapped up. What did he want? To invite us to a dinner party and to offer me a job when this place fails. He said that? More or less. Silas's hands clenched into fists. That son of a... Silas. Clara set down the pot and faced him. We need to talk about this. Really talk. Because he's not going to stop, and we need a plan. I told you, I'm handling it. How? By ignoring it and hoping it goes away? By doing what I've always done, working hard, keeping my head down, and surviving. That's not going to be enough this time. You know it's not. Silas turned away, his shoulders rigid. What do you want me to say, Clara? That I'm scared? That I don't know if I can save this place? Fine. I'm terrified. Every day I wake up wondering if this is the day it all falls apart. Is that what you wanted to hear? Yes, Clara said quietly, because at least then we can figure out what to do about it together. He turned back to her, his eyes blazing. Why do you care so much? This isn't your fight. Yes, it is, because whether you like it or not, I'm invested now, in this ranch, in this life, in... She stopped herself just short of saying in you, but Silas heard it anyway. She could see it in the way his expression shifted, in the way he crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed her shoulders. Don't, he said roughly. Don't invest in me, Clara. I'm not worth it. That's not your decision to make. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From caring? From living? That's not protection, Silas. That's cowardice. The word hit like a slap. Silas dropped his hands and stepped back, his face going blank. Clara immediately regretted it. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, and you're right. He laughed bitterly. I am a coward. I've been hiding out here for 10 years, telling myself I was honoring their memory when really I was just too afraid to live. And now that I finally have something, someone, worth fighting for, I don't know how. Clara's breath caught. Someone worth fighting for? Silas met her eyes, and in them she saw everything he'd been trying so hard to hide, the longing, the fear, the desperate, terrifying hope. Yeah, he said roughly, someone. The air between them crackled with possibility. Clara took a step forward, then another until they were inches apart. Then fight, she whispered, not alone. With me. Let me help you save this place. Let me be part of this. And if we lose anyway? Then we lose together, but at least we tried. Silas raised his hand slowly, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking for permission. And then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and hungry and full of 10 years of loneliness crashing against 1 month of barely restrained want. Clara kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. What are we doing? He asked. I don't know, Clara admitted, but I don't want to stop. Me neither. They stood there in the middle of the kitchen, wrapped in each other, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, the future felt like something more than just survival. It felt like possibility. They didn't talk about the kiss. The next morning, Clara woke to find Silas already gone, a pot of coffee left warming on the stove and a note that said simply, North Pasture, back by noon. She stood in the kitchen holding that scrap of paper, trying to decipher what it meant. Was he running, regretting, or just giving them both space to breathe? Clara folded the note and tucked it into her apron pocket, then went about her morning routine. But everything felt different now. The house seemed smaller, more intimate, Every surface she touched reminded her of him. The chair where he sat for breakfast, the door frame where his shoulder always brushed when he passed through, the sink where their hands had tangled in dishwater. She was scrubbing the floor when she heard the wagon return. Her heart kicked up, but she forced herself to keep working, to not look desperate or needy, or any of the thousand things she felt. Silas came in through the back door, tracking mud she'd just cleaned. He stopped when he saw her on her hands and knees, guilt flashing across his face. "Sorry, It's fine," Clara said, sitting back on her heels. "Floor gets dirty. That's what floors do." He stood there awkwardly, hat in his hands, looking everywhere but at her. "About last night." Clara's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought, the backpedaling, the regret. "I shouldn't have—" He stopped, started again. "I mean, I wanted to, but I should have—" "Silas." Clara stood up, dropping her scrub brush into the bucket. "If you're about to apologize for kissing me, don't." "I'm not apologizing for kissing you. I'm apologizing for not talking to you after, for running this morning." That surprised her. "Oh." "I panicked," he admitted. "Woke up and realized what I'd done, what it meant, and I needed to think." "And what did you think about?" "How scared I am." He finally met her eyes. "How the last time I let myself want something this much, I lost it. How I don't know if I can survive losing again." Clara crossed the room until she was standing right in front of him. "You can't live your whole life afraid of loss. That's not living. That's just existing." "I know that. Up here I know it." He tapped his temple. "But knowing it and feeling it are different things." "So what do you want to do?" Silas looked at her for a long moment, his eyes tracing her face like he was memorizing it. "I want to try. With you. Even though it terrifies me. Even though I'll probably mess it up." Relief flooded through Clara so fast it made her dizzy. "Okay. Okay. Okay," she smiled. "We'll try. We'll probably mess it up together, but at least we're being honest about it." Something in Silas's expression softened. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture already becoming familiar. "How'd you get so brave?" "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid." "Same thing, I think." He kissed her then, softer than the night before, but no less meaningful. When they pulled apart, Clara said, "You still need to help me finish that floor you just muddied up." Silas laughed, actually laughed, and grabbed a rag. "Yes, ma'am." They spent the afternoon working side by side, and if their hands touched more often than necessary, if their shoulders bumped and their eyes caught and held, well, that was nobody's business but theirs. The garden was coming along. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara and Silas worked it together in the early mornings before the heat set in. They'd cleared most of the debris now, turned the soil, mapped out where Anna's roses had once grown. Clara had ordered seeds and cuttings from town, not roses, not yet, but wildflowers and herbs that would bring the space back to life. One morning, while they were building a new trellis, Silas said, "She would have liked you." Clara looked up from the post she was holding steady. "Anna?" "Yeah, she had a thing about people who didn't give up. Used to say that stubbornness was just hope in work clothes." He hammered in a nail. "You would have gotten along." It was the first time he'd talked about his wife directly to Clara, and she handled it carefully. "What was she like?" "Stubborn, like I said, smart, had a laugh that could make you feel like you'd won something just by hearing it." He paused, considering. "She was better than me. At most things. Definitely at people." "I doubt that." "It's true. I was rough around the edges when we met. Still am, I guess. But she saw something in me worth smoothing out." He drove in another nail. "Emma was like that too, fearless. Would climb anything, try anything. I was constantly pulling her out of trees or fishing her out of the creek." Claire could hear the love in his voice, but also something else. Not pain exactly, more like tenderness. Like he was handling the memories gently instead of shoving them away. "You talk about them differently now," she observed. "Yeah, I guess I do." He looked at her. "That's because of you. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You showed up and refused to leave, refused to let me keep drowning in the past. You made me remember that there were good parts, not just the ending." Clara's throat tightened. I'm glad. They finished the trellis in comfortable silence, and when it was done, Silas stood back to survey their work. It's coming together. It is. Think we can get roses to grow again? I think we can try. That afternoon, while Clara was inside preparing supper, she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, her stomach sinking when she saw Victor Hale riding up with 3 men she didn't recognize. Silas emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive. Clara hurried outside, positioning herself on the porch where she could see and hear everything. Hale, Silas said flatly. What's this about? Victor dismounted, his men staying on their horses. Just a friendly visit, Mercer. Wanted to check on those fence lines we discussed. My cattle keep wandering onto your property. Your cattle wander because you cut my fence. That's a serious accusation. Got any proof? I know it was you. Victor spread his hands. I'm just trying to be neighborly. In fact, I brought my foreman and a couple of hands to help repair the damage, free of charge. I don't want your help. Silas, be reasonable. You can't manage this whole ranch alone. Let us fix the fence and we'll call it square. The fence is fine. Is it? Victor's expression hardened just slightly. Because from where I'm standing, this whole operation is falling apart. The fences, the barn, the house. How long before you can't keep up anymore? Silas's hands clenched into fists. Get off my land. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to take what's mine. Victor glanced up at Clara, and something calculating entered his eyes. Is she yours too, Mercer? Because last I checked, you turned down the marriage. She's free to make her own choices. Clara felt Silas go rigid even from a distance. Clara works here, Silas said carefully. That's all you need to know. Does she? Victor's smile was cold. Or are you stringing her along until this place goes under and she has nowhere to go? That seems cruel, even for you. Victor. Silas took a step forward. I'm leaving, Victor said, mounting his horse. But think about what I said. About all of it. This ranch. That woman on your porch. The future you're trying to hold on to. Sometimes the kindest thing a man can do is let go before he drags everyone down with him. He rode off, his men following. Silas stood in the yard for a long moment, staring after them, his shoulders tight with fury. Clara came down from the porch and touched his arm. He's just trying to get in your head. He's right, though. Silas turned to her, his eyes bleak. About all of it. This place is falling apart. I don't know how much longer I can hold it together, and you deserve better than— Don't! Clara's voice was sharp. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't let him tell you what I deserve. I decide that. Clara, no. Listen to me. I came here with nothing. I still have nothing except what we're building together. And I'd rather have that, have this, have you, than all the security Victor Hale could offer. Even if it means losing everything? Even then. Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You wrote a letter, Clara said against his chest, and you let me stay. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara couldn't sleep. Victor's words kept echoing in her head. Sometimes the kindest thing a man can do is let go before he drags everyone down with him. Was Silas thinking the same thing? Was he lying awake in his room, calculating the cost of keeping her here, wondering if she'd be better off somewhere else? She rolled over, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. She wouldn't wait for him to push her away. She'd prove to him, to both of them, that she was staying by choice, that she wasn't some fragile thing that needed protecting. The next morning, Clara got up before dawn and rode into town alone. She'd watched Silas saddle horses enough times to manage it herself, though the mare gave her a skeptical look that suggested she knew Clara was an amateur. Work with me here, Clara muttered, hauling herself into the saddle with less grace than she'd hoped for. The ride took longer than it had in the wagon, and by the time she reached town, the sun was fully up and her legs were aching. She tied the horse outside the bank and went inside, her heart pounding. The banker, a thin man named Mr. Ashford with spectacles and a perpetual frown, looked up from his desk when she entered. Help you, miss? I'm here about the Mercer Ranch, Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The loan payments. Ashford's expression became guarded. Are you family? I'm his. I work there. I'm involved in the operation. I see. And what exactly did you want to know? How much he owes? How behind he is? What it would take to get current? Ashford studied her for a long moment. That's private financial information, miss. I can't just share it with anyone who walks in. I'm not anyone. Clara stopped, realizing she didn't actually know what she was. Not his wife, not family, just someone who cared. Please, I'm trying to help. Something in her voice must have reached him, because Ashford sighed and pulled out a ledger. He's 3 months behind. Owes $472 to get current, plus the regular monthly payment of $158. Clara's stomach dropped. $630. It might as well have been $6,000. And if he can't pay? Then we foreclose. Sell the property at auction. Ashford looked at her over his spectacles. Likely to Victor Hale, who's already expressed interest in purchasing if it comes to that. How long does he have? End of the month. 3 weeks. Clara nodded, her mind racing. Thank you for your time. She left the bank and stood on the wooden sidewalk, trying to figure out what to do next. $600. Where could she possibly find that kind of money? The general store. Mrs. Patterson might be a gossip, but she also ran the only store for 50 miles. Clara had an idea. Inside, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her inventory, surprise crossing her face. Miss Whitmore, didn't expect to see you in town alone. I need to ask you something, Clara said. Do you ever hire help? For the store, for deliveries, anything? Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Looking for work? Extra work. I'm already helping at the ranch, but I thought... She trailed off, realizing how desperate she sounded. Are things that bad out there? Clara lifted her chin. I'm just looking for opportunities. Mrs. Patterson studied her, and Clara could practically see the calculations happening. Then, surprisingly, her expression softened. I could use someone to help with inventory on Saturdays, organizing the stockroom, updating the ledgers. Pay would be $2 for the day. $2. It was something, not nearly enough, but something. I'll take it, Clara said. Saturday morning, 7 sharp. Don't be late. Clara thanked her and left, already doing the math in her head. $2 a week, 4 weeks until the deadline. $8. It was nowhere near what they needed, but it was a start. She spent the rest of the morning going to every business in town, the saloon, the livery, the boarding house, asking if they needed help. Most turned her down. A few offered $1 here and there for specific tasks. By the time she headed back to the ranch, she had commitments for maybe $15 total. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Silas was waiting for her when she rode up, his expression thunderous. Where the hell were you? Clara dismounted, trying to ignore her screaming leg muscles. Town. Why? Because I needed to do something instead of just sitting here waiting for everything to fall apart. What did you do? Clara led the horse to the barn, Silas following. I went to the bank. Found out how much you owe. She heard him stop walking. You had no right. I had every right, Clara whirled on him. You said we were in this together. You can't say that, and then keep me in the dark about how bad things really are. It's my debt, Clara. My problem. It's our problem now, whether you like it or not. She unsaddled the horse with fumbling hands. $630, 3 weeks. That's what we're looking at. How did you... Silas ran a hand through his hair. What else did you do? I got work in town. Saturdays at the general store, plus some other odd jobs during the week. It's not much, but it's something. No. Excuse me? I said no. You're not working yourself to death trying to save my ranch. It's not just your ranch anymore. Clara threw down the saddle with more force than necessary. And you don't get to tell me what I can and can't do. I'm trying to help. I don't want your help. Not like this. Then how? How do you want me to help, Silas? By standing around watching while Victor Hale takes everything? By leaving before it gets too hard? Her voice cracked. Because I'm not doing that. I'm staying and I'm fighting, and if you don't like it, that's too damn bad. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, the tension crackling between them. Finally, Silas said quietly, You went to the bank for me. Of course I did. You got jobs. You're trying to earn money to pay my debts. Our debts. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her, hard and desperate, and full of something that felt like gratitude mixed with frustration, mixed with fear. When they broke apart, he said, "You're the most stubborn, infuriating woman I've ever met." "Good thing you like stubborn." "I do." He rested his forehead against hers. "I really do. But Clara, $15 isn't going to save this place." "I know, but it's 15 more than we had this morning. We need a real plan." "Then let's make one. Together." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, laying out everything: the debts, the assets, the timeline. It looked even worse written down than it had in Clara's head. "We could sell the cattle," Silas said. "That would get us maybe 300 if we're lucky." "And then what? How do you run a ranch without cattle?" "I don't know. Grow crops? Lease the land?" "In a drought?" Silas threw down the pencil. "Then I'm out of ideas." Clara stared at the numbers, her mind working. "What about Jack?" "Your friend. He offered to help." "I told you I'm not taking charity." "It's not charity if you pay him back. Call it a loan. A business investment." "Clara, your pride is going to kill this ranch, Silas. Is that really what you want? To lose everything because you were too stubborn to ask a friend for help?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "If I ask him and he says yes, it's still only a temporary fix. We'd owe him instead of the bank. But we'd have time. Time to figure out something more permanent. Time to survive the drought. Time to build something real." Silas looked at her, and Clara could see him warring with himself. Pride versus practicality. Fear versus hope. "All right," he said finally. "I'll write to Jack." Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. He might say no." "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because he's your friend, and friends don't let friends lose everything without a fight." The letter went out the next day, and then came the waiting. Jack was in Helena, which meant it would take at least a week for the letter to reach him, and another week for a response. 2 weeks they didn't really have. In the meantime, Clara started her Saturday work at the general store. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a fair if demanding boss, and the work was tedious but straightforward. Inventory, ledgers, organizing shelves. Clara did it all without complaint, pocketing her $2 at the end of the day like it was treasure. She also picked up other jobs: mending for the woman who ran the boarding house, cleaning for the saloon owner's wife, helping with laundry for families who could spare a few coins. Every penny went into a jar she kept hidden in her room. Silas watched her work herself to exhaustion with an expression that was part admiration, part guilt. More than once, he tried to tell her to stop, to rest, to let him handle it. And every time she refused. "This is my choice," she told him. "Let me make it." 2 weeks after they'd sent the letter, Jack showed up. Clara was in the garden, planting the rose cuttings that had finally arrived from the nursery, when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see Jack Morrison climbing down, a grin on his face. "Heard you folks might need a hand," he called out. Silas emerged from the barn, his expression transforming from wariness to relief. "You got my letter?" "Got it. Figured I'd deliver my answer in person." Jack walked over, looked at the garden, then at Clara covered in dirt. "You two have been busy." "Trying to keep our heads above water," Silas said. "Well, that's what friends are for. Throwing you a rope." Jack pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Here, $500. Should be enough to get you current with the bank and have a little left over." Silas stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "Jack, it's a loan, not a gift. I drew up papers. You pay me back when you can, with interest if it makes you feel better. But right now, you take this money and you save your ranch." "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you and take the damn envelope." Silas took it, his jaw working. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Jack turned to Clara. "And you, I heard about your Saturday job, about all your jobs. That true?" Clara stood up, brushing dirt from her skirts. "Needed to help somehow." "You've got spine, I'll give you that." He looked between them. "You two really are in this together, aren't you?" "Yeah," Silas said, his eyes on Clara. "We are." Jack's grin widened. "Good. Then you might actually make it." They celebrated that night with the best meal Clara could put together. Nothing fancy, but it tasted like victory. Jack regaled them with stories from Helena, and Silas actually relaxed, laughing and joking in a way Clara had rarely seen. But underneath the celebration, she could feel something shifting. They'd bought themselves time, but time wasn't a solution. It was just a delay. And Victor Hale wasn't going to give up just because they'd made one loan payment. After Jack left the next morning, promising to visit again soon, Silas and Clara stood in the yard watching the dust settle. "We did it," Clara said. "We saved the ranch. For now. That's all we've got, now. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Silas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you." The words were so quiet she almost missed them. Clara's breath caught. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "What did you say?" "I love you." He said it louder this time, more certain. "I didn't plan to, didn't want to, but I do. And I thought you should know." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kissed her then, deep and sure. And Clara thought that maybe, just maybe, they really could make this work. But that night, alone in her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, some test they hadn't prepared for, some choice they'd have to make. She didn't know how right she was. 3 days later, Victor Hale came back. But this time, he brought something different, a proposal. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him ride up, alone this time. Silas was out checking the fence lines, which meant she'd have to deal with Victor herself. She straightened her shoulders and walked to meet him. "Mr. Hale." "Miss Whitmore, I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" Victor dismounted, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "About your future. About what happens when Silas loses this place despite his friend's generous loan." "He's not going to lose it." "Clara." Victor said her name with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. "May I call you Clara? I think we're past formalities. I'd prefer Miss Whitmore." "Fair enough." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "I have a proposition for you. A real one, not the veiled suggestions I made before." "I'm not interested." "Hear me out, please." Against her better judgment, Clara nodded. "I'm offering you a position at my ranch, head housekeeper with your own cottage, a generous salary, 5 times what you're making now with all your little jobs combined, and full authority over the household staff. It's a respected position, Clara, one that would give you security, independence, a real future." Clara crossed her arms. "In exchange for what?" "For nothing except your agreement to come work for me. No strings, no expectations beyond the job itself." He paused. "I know what you're thinking, that this is some scheme to get Silas's land. And maybe in the beginning, that's what it was. But I've watched you these past weeks. The way you fight for him, for this place. The way you work yourself to the bone trying to hold it together. You deserve better than that. I have everything I want right here. Do you? Or are you just too stubborn to admit when you're fighting a losing battle?" Victor's voice gentled. "I'm not the villain you think I am. I'm a businessman, yes. I want Silas's land, yes. But I also recognize quality when I see it. And you, Clara Whitmore, are wasted on a failing ranch and a broken man." "He's not broken, isn't he? He's been living in the past for a decade. You've given him a reason to try again, I'll grant you that. But what happens when trying isn't enough? When the drought comes and the crops fail and the cattle die? What happens when he realizes he can't provide for you, can't give you the life you deserve? He'll push you away, Clara. To protect you, he'll destroy what you've built together, and then you'll have nothing." The words hit too close to home, echoing Clara's own fears. She thought about Silas's face when he'd tried to send her away that first day, the fear she still sometimes saw in his eyes. "Think about it," Victor said, pressing the envelope into her hands. "That's all I ask. The offer stands for 1 week. After that, I retract it, and you've lost your chance." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Clara standing in the yard with an envelope that felt like poison in her hands. She should have thrown it away, should have burned it, should have told Silas the moment he came home. But she didn't. She hid it in her room, under her mattress, and tried to pretend it didn't exist. Tried to pretend Victor's words weren't circling in her head like vultures. "You deserve better than a failing ranch and a broken man. He'll push you away to protect you. You'll have nothing." That night, Silas noticed something was wrong. You're quiet, he said over supper. Just tired. Clara. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Talk to me. It's nothing, really. But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. Later, lying in bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what she was so afraid of. Not Victor's offer itself, she had no intention of taking it, but the doubt it had planted. The tiny, insidious voice that whispered, what if he's right? What if loving Silas, fighting for this ranch, building this life? What if it all wasn't enough? The next morning, Clara went through her routine mechanically, making breakfast, cleaning, preparing for her Saturday shift at the general store. Silas watched her with concern but didn't push, giving her the space she clearly needed. She was almost to the door, ready to leave for town when she heard it. A crash from the barn. Then Silas's voice cursing. Clara dropped her bag and ran. She found him on the ground, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, the ladder he'd been using lying sideways. He'd been fixing a beam in the loft when it gave way. Don't move, Clara said, kneeling beside him. Let me see. I'm fine. You're bleeding all over the place. That's not fine. She pressed her apron against the wound, trying to stop the flow. Can you stand? Yeah, just knocked the wind out of me. She helped him up, supporting his weight as they made it to the house. Once inside, she sat him down and properly cleaned the cut. It wasn't deep enough to need stitching, but it was going to bruise badly. What were you doing up there alone? She asked, her hands shaking as she bandaged him. Needed to be fixed. It could have waited. You could have asked me to spot you. You had to go to work. Work can wait. You can't. She sat back, looking at him. You scared me. I'm sorry. They sat in silence for a moment, Clara's fear slowly transforming into something else, into clarity. I got offered a job, she said quietly. Silas went very still. What? Victor came by yesterday, offered me a position at his ranch, head housekeeper, good money, my own cottage, security. And you're telling me this because? Because I need you to know that I'm choosing to stay. Not because I have no other options, but because I want to be here. With you. She took his hand. He said you'd push me away eventually, to protect me. He said I deserve better than a failing ranch and a broken man. Silas's jaw clenched. Maybe he's right. No, he's wrong. About all of it. Clara moved closer. You're not broken, Silas. You're healing. And this ranch isn't failing, it's fighting. We're fighting. Together. And I don't want security if it means losing this. Losing you. Clara, I'm not taking his offer. I'm staying here. But I needed you to know that it was my choice. That every day I stay, every sacrifice I make, every hour I work, it's because I want to, because I love you, and I love this life we're building. Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. It's true. It's not. We deserve each other, the good and the bad and the terrifying. She pulled back to look at him. But you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't push me away. That when things get hard, and they will, you won't try to protect me by destroying us. Silas cupped her face in his hands. I promise. I swear to you, Clara. I won't run. Not from this. Not from you. Good. She kissed him softly. Because I'm not going anywhere either. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the morning light streaming through the windows of a house that was finally starting to feel like home. Clara missed her shift at the general store. She didn't care. Some things were more important than $2. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just crossed some invisible line, that the real test was still coming. And she was right. Because the next morning, when Clara went out to the garden to check on her roses, she found them trampled. Every single cutting ground into the dirt by boot prints that were too large to be Silas's. And she knew. Victor Hale had just declared war. Clara stood in the ruined garden, her hands shaking with rage. Every rose cutting she'd carefully planted, every wildflower she'd nurtured, every hour of work she and Silas had poured into this space, destroyed. Crushed under deliberate, methodical boot prints that formed a path straight through the center of what they'd built. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Silas staring at the destruction, his face gone white. When? he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometime last night, after we went to bed. Clara knelt down, touching one of the trampled cuttings. It was deliberate. Look at the pattern. They walked through here multiple times to make sure nothing survived. Silas's hands clenched into fists. Hale. We don't know that for sure. Yes, we do. He turned away, heading toward the barn. I'm going over there. Clara grabbed his arm. And do what? Accuse him without proof? Start a fight you can't win? I can't just stand here and do nothing. Then don't stand here. Help me replant. Show him that whatever he does, we're not breaking. Silas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Clara, he destroyed weeks of work in one night. If we replant, what's to stop him from doing it again? Nothing, but if we don't replant, he wins. He gets to take something we built together and turn it into nothing. She squeezed his arm. I'm not giving him that. Are you? For a long moment, Silas just stared at the trampled earth. Then, slowly, his expression shifted from rage to something harder, more determined. No, he said, I'm not. They spent the morning salvaging what they could. Some of the cuttings might survive if they were carefully tended. Others were beyond saving. Clara worked with methodical precision, refusing to let herself cry even though her chest felt like it was caving in. This garden had been more than just plants. It had been proof that beautiful things could grow again after loss, that the past could be honored without being a prison, and someone had deliberately destroyed that. Around noon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not Victor Hale, but one of his men. He stopped at the property line, called out something Clara couldn't hear, and rode off. Silas came back from checking the fence line, his expression grim. He cut the wire again. Western pasture. My cattle are going to wander onto his land, and then he'll claim damages. How do you know it was him? Because I found this. Silas held up a piece of fabric, expensive material, the kind Victor's men wore. Caught on the wire. Clara took the fabric, turning it over in her hands. We should go to the sheriff. With what? A scrap of cloth and some boot prints? Hale's got half the county in his pocket. The sheriff won't do anything. Then what do we do? Silas was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something Clara couldn't quite identify. Maybe it's time to accept that I can't win this fight. Clara's stomach dropped. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Victor's right. Maybe I'm dragging you down with me. Maybe the smart thing, the kind thing, would be to let you go while you still have options. Don't you dare, Clara's voice came out sharp. Don't you dare use this as an excuse to push me away. I'm not. Yes, you are. That's exactly what you're doing. Things get hard, and your first instinct is to shove me toward the exit so you can suffer alone. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. I told you I'm not going anywhere. That I choose this, choose you, every single day. Did you think I meant only on the easy days? This isn't just hard, Clara. This is dangerous. Hale isn't going to stop at destroying gardens and cutting fences. He wants me gone, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Then we make it impossible for him to hurt us. How? Clara thought fast, her mind racing. We document everything, every cut fence, every trampled crop, every threat. We build a case so solid that even a bought sheriff can't ignore it. And we tell everyone in town what's happening. Make it public. Make it so if something happens to us, everyone knows who's responsible. That could make things worse. Or it could make them better. Right now he's operating in the shadows. Let's drag him into the light and see how brave he is then. Silas looked at her with something that might have been awe. You really think that'll work? I think it's worth trying, unless you have a better idea. He didn't. So that afternoon they rode into town together, carrying their evidence and their story. The sheriff's office was a small building that smelled of coffee and old tobacco. Sheriff Brennan looked up from his desk when they entered, his expression going carefully neutral when he saw who it was. Mercer, Miss Whitmore, what can I do for you? Silas laid out the fabric, described the cut fences, the trampled garden, the pattern of harassment. Clara watched the sheriff's face, trying to read his reaction. Brennan examined the evidence with the air of a man going through motions he didn't believe in. This is pretty thin, Silas. A piece of cloth isn't proof of anything. It's proof someone was on my property who shouldn't have been. Could have blown there. Could have been dropped by anyone. It's from Victor Hale's men. I recognize the material. You recognize similar material. That's not the same thing. Brennan leaned back in his chair. Look, I'm not saying nothing's happening, but you're asking me to accuse the biggest landowner in the county based on circumstantial evidence. I can't do that. Can't or won't? Clara asked quietly. Brennan's eyes shifted to her. That's a dangerous question, miss. It's an honest one. I enforce the law, but I need actual proof to do that. Bring me a witness. Bring me concrete evidence, and I'll act. Until then, my hands are tied. They left the sheriff's office with nothing but frustration. Clara could see Silas struggling not to explode, his jaw working as they walked toward the general store. That went about as well as I expected, he muttered. We tried. That's something. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, we just proved that Hale can do whatever he wants and nobody's going to stop him. Clara didn't have an answer for that. They were about to mount the wagon when Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway of her store. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Mercer, might I have a word? They followed her inside, where she pulled them toward the back, away from any customers. I heard what happened, she said quietly. The garden, the fences. Word travels. Does it travel to the sheriff? Silas asked bitterly. The sheriff knows which side his bread is buttered on. But not everyone in this town is in Hale's pocket. Mrs. Patterson glanced around, then leaned in. There's talk about other ranchers who've had similar problems. Fences cut, cattle scattered, crops trampled, anyone who stands between Hale and land he wants. Why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Because people are scared. Hale's got money, influence, and men willing to do his dirty work. Standing up to him is a good way to lose everything. She paused. But if enough people stood together, maybe that would change. Clara felt a spark of hope. How many others? 3 that I know of. Small ranchers like you, struggling but holding on. If you could get them to come forward together, make a united complaint, that might be enough to force Brennan's hand. Silas shook his head. They won't do it. Too risky. Maybe, but you won't know unless you ask. Mrs. Patterson put a hand on Clara's arm. You've got courage, girl. More than most. Use it. They spent the next 3 days riding to neighboring ranches, talking to people who'd suffered under Victor Hale's shadow. Some slammed doors in their faces. Others listened but refused to commit. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Hale had cultivated it well. But on the 3rd day, they found someone willing to stand with them. Martin Fletcher was a widower in his 60s, running a small cattle operation on the eastern edge of the county. He listened to their story with a weathered face that had seen too much and trusted too little. Hale cut my fence twice last month, he said finally. Scattered my herd. Took me a week to round them all up, and I lost 3 head in the process. Did you report it? Silas asked. To who? Brennan? He gave me the same song and dance he gave you. No proof, can't do anything, sorry for your trouble. Fletcher spat into the dirt. I've been ranching this land for 40 years, raised my kids here, buried my wife here, and I'll be damned if I let some rich bastard run me off. Will you stand with us? Clara asked. Make an official complaint together? Fletcher studied them both. You 2 really think you can win this? I think we can try, Clara said. And if we lose, at least we lose fighting instead of cowering. Something in Fletcher's expression shifted. All right, I'm in, but we'll need more than just the 3 of us. They found 2 more. Sarah Kemp, a woman running her dead husband's sheep ranch, and the Rodriguez brothers, who'd immigrated from Mexico 10 years ago and built a small but successful horse breeding operation. All of them had stories of harassment, of mysterious accidents, of economic pressure applied with surgical precision, and all of them were tired of being afraid. The 5 of them met at Silas's ranch on a Sunday afternoon, gathering around the kitchen table that suddenly felt too small for the weight of what they were planning. We go to Brennan together, Silas said. Tomorrow morning. 5 voices are harder to ignore than 1. What if he still refuses to act? Sarah asked. Then we go over his head, right to the territorial governor, get a federal marshal involved if we have to. That could take months. Then we hold on for months. Silas looked around the table. I won't lie to you. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Hale's going to push back, and he's not going to play fair. Anyone who wants out, now's the time. Nobody moved. Clara felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. This was what community looked like. Not perfect people making perfect choices, but scared, stubborn folks deciding that enough was enough. They finalized their plan and agreed to meet at the sheriff's office at 9 the next morning. As everyone was leaving, Martin Fletcher pulled Clara aside. "You're good for him," he said, nodding toward Silas. "I knew Anna back in the day. Good woman. She'd have liked you." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. Make sure you're ready for that." "I am. I hope so. Because Hale doesn't lose gracefully." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, her mind running through 1,000 different scenarios. What if Brennan still refused to act? What if Victor retaliated against all of them? What if standing up just made everything worse? Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. She found Silas already there, sitting in the dark with a cup of coffee. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me?" Clara sat down and they shared the silence for a while. Finally, Silas said, "I've been thinking about what Fletcher said, about this getting ugly." "Me too." "If it does, if Hale comes after us harder, I need you to promise me something." Clara's stomach nodded. "What?" "Promise me you'll leave. If it gets too dangerous, if I tell you to go, you'll actually do it." "No." "Clara?" "No, Silas. I'm not making that promise because I won't keep it." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "We're past the point of one of us running to protect the other. We're in this together, remember? For better or worse. We're not married. Does that matter? We're committed. We're building a life. That's worth more than a piece of paper." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me." Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Not because of Hale or the ranch or any of this mess, but because I love you and I want you to be my wife. Because when I think about the future, if we even have one, I can't see it without you." He squeezed her hand. "So marry me, Clara Whitmore. Make an honest man out of me." She should have said yes immediately, should have thrown herself into his arms and laughed and cried and celebrated. But instead she heard herself say, "Ask me again after we win." Silas blinked. "What?" "Ask me again after we've beaten Hale and saved the ranch and proven that we can actually build something lasting. Ask me when we're not running on fear and adrenaline and desperation." She smiled even though her eyes were burning. "Ask me when we have a future worth promising ourselves to." For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he laughed, rough and surprised. "You're really going to make me wait?" "I'm really going to make you wait." "What if I change my mind?" "You won't." "Pretty confident." "I have to be. One of us does." He pulled her out of her chair and into his lap, holding her close. "All right. I'll ask again after we win, but you better say yes when I do." "We'll see." "Clara." She kissed him, cutting off whatever protest he was about to make, and for a few minutes there was no Victor Hale, no threatened ranch, no uncertain future. Just the two of them, holding on to each other in the dark. The next morning they rode into town with their small coalition. 5 ranchers, 5 stories, 5 witnesses to Victor Hale's pattern of intimidation and harassment. Sheriff Brennan looked distinctly uncomfortable when they all filed into his office. "What's this about?" he asked, though his expression said he already knew. Martin Fletcher spoke first, laying out his complaints with the precision of someone who'd practiced. Then Sarah, then the Rodriguez brothers, then Silas. Each story built on the last, painting a picture that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. When they were done, Brennan sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. "This is a serious accusation you're making." "It's a serious problem we're having," Martin said. "You're asking me to go after Victor Hale based on circumstantial evidence from 5 people who all have reasons to be biased against him." "We're asking you to do your job," Clara said quietly. Brennan's eyes snapped to her. "Excuse me?" "Your job. Investigate crimes, protect citizens, enforce the law." She leaned forward. 5 ranchers have come to you with evidence of systematic harassment. At what point does circumstantial evidence become a pattern? At what point do you have to act? When I have proof that would hold up in court, then get proof. Talk to Hale's men. Check the timeline of these incidents against his whereabouts. Do the work. Brennan's face reddened. You're telling me how to do my job? I'm asking you to do your job. There's a difference. For a long moment, Clara thought he might throw them all out. But then something shifted in his expression. Maybe shame, maybe irritation, maybe just the realization that 5 witnesses were harder to ignore than one. All right, he said finally, I'll look into it. Talk to some people, see what I can find. But I'm not making any promises. That's all we're asking, Silas said. They left the office feeling cautiously hopeful. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step. A crack in Victor Hale's armor. The retaliation came faster than Clara expected. 2 days later, she went into town for her Saturday shift at the general store and found Mrs. Patterson waiting with a regretful expression. I'm sorry, dear, I can't keep you on. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. Why not? Victor Hale came by yesterday, made it clear that any business that associates with you or Silas would lose his patronage, and I can't afford that. I'm sorry. It was the same story at the boarding house, at the saloon, at every place Clara had picked up work. One by one, her sources of income dried up. Victor was cutting them off economically, making sure they couldn't earn the extra money they needed to stay afloat. Clara reported back to Silas with a sick feeling in her stomach. He's choking us out. I know. Fletcher sent word this morning. 2 of his biggest buyers pulled their contracts. Sarah lost her wool merchant. The Rodriguez brothers had their feed supplier cancel on them. Silas paced the kitchen. He's not just coming after us. He's going after everyone who stood with us. So what do we do? I don't know. Silas stopped pacing, his hands braced on the counter. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should have just kept our heads down. And let him win. At least everyone would still have their livelihoods. They'd have their livelihoods and no dignity, no freedom. They'd be living under Victor's thumb for the rest of their lives. Clara moved to stand beside him. We did the right thing. Did we? Because right now it feels like we just made everything worse. Before Clara could respond, they heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. They went to the door together and found Victor Hale riding up with 4 of his men. He dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone who knew he held all the cards. Mercer, Miss Whitmore, we need to talk. Get off my property, Silas said. I'm here to offer you a deal. One last chance to end this without anyone getting hurt. I'm not interested in anything you're offering. Not even a way to protect the people who stood with you, because right now they're suffering for your pride. Fletcher's going to lose his ranch by the end of the month. Sarah Kemp's creditors are circling. The Rodriguez brothers are going to have to sell their stock at a loss. Victor spread his hands, all because you convinced them to stand against me. Clara saw Silas flinch, saw the guilt hit him like a physical blow. Here's what I'm proposing, Victor continued. You sell me this ranch at a fair price. More than fair, actually. I'll pay off your debts, give you enough to start over somewhere else, and I'll back off everyone who joined your little rebellion. They keep their operations, their contracts, their peace. All you have to do is walk away. And if I don't? Then I keep applying pressure until everyone breaks. And trust me, Silas, I have more pressure to apply than you have will to resist. Silas's hands clenched into fists. You're threatening innocent people to get what you want. I'm showing you the cost of your stubbornness. The choice is yours. Victor turned to Clara. And you, Miss Whitmore. My offer still stands. A position at my ranch, a comfortable life, a future that doesn't involve going down with this sinking ship. You could save everyone a lot of pain by accepting it. No, Clara said firmly. Think about it. You're watching good people suffer because of your attachment to a man and a ranch that are both doomed. Is that really what you want? To be the reason 5 families lose everything? The words burrowed under Clara's skin like splinters. Because he was right, wasn't he? Fletcher and Sarah and the Rodriguez brothers were suffering because she and Silas had convinced them to fight. I'll give you 3 days to decide, Victor said, mounting his horse. After that, the offer expires and the pressure increases. Your choice. He rode off, leaving Clara and Silas standing in the yard with a decision that felt impossible. That night, neither of them could eat. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence heavy and suffocating. "We have to take his deal," Silas said finally. Clara's head snapped up. "What?" "We have to. I can't let Fletcher and the others lose everything because of me. I can't—" His voice broke. "I already lost Anna and Emma. I can't be responsible for destroying more lives." Silas, "No, listen, Victor's right. This ranch is doomed. We both know it. Even if we survive hail, we've got the drought coming, the debts, the failing infrastructure. We're fighting a losing battle, and we're dragging good people down with us." He looked at her with eyes that were hollow with defeat. "It's over, Clara. We tried, and we lost. Now we need to accept that and minimize the damage." Clara felt like she'd been punched in the chest. "So you're just giving up?" "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." Silas flinched. "Maybe I am, but at least I'm not being selfish." "Selfish? Fighting for what we've built is selfish?" "When it hurts other people, yes." He stood up, agitation pouring off him in waves. "Don't you get it? I can't let them suffer for my pride. I won't." "What about me? What about us?" "We'll figure something out. We can go somewhere else, start over." "With what money? What prospects?" Clara stood too, her voice rising. "You think Victor's just going to let us ride off into the sunset together? He'll make sure we're broke and desperate and separated. That's what men like him do." "Then you should take his offer." The words fell like stones. Clara stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "What did you say?" "You should take Victor's offer, the position at his ranch. It's a good job, Clara. Security, a future—" "Don't you dare!" Clara's voice shook. "Don't you dare try to push me away now. Not after everything we've been through, not after you promised. I'm trying to protect you. I don't want your protection. I want your partnership. I want you to fight instead of rolling over the second things get hard. This isn't just hard, Clara. This is impossible. Nothing is impossible if we face it together." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and angry. "But you have to actually try. You can't just give up every time you get scared of losing something." "I'm not scared of losing something. I'm terrified of losing you." The confession burst out of him like it had been held back too long. "Do you understand that? Every day you stay here, every day you fight beside me, I fall deeper in love with you. And the thought of watching you lose everything because you hitched yourself to my sinking ship? It's killing me, Clara. It's actually killing me." "Then let me make my own choice." "I am." "No, you're trying to make it for me. You're trying to push me toward Victor's offer because you've already decided that losing is inevitable." Clara grabbed his shirt, forcing him to look at her. "But I don't believe that. I believe we can win. I believe we can save this ranch and protect our friends and build something real and lasting. I believe it because I have to. Because the alternative is giving up on everything we've built, everything we are. And I'm not ready to do that. Are you?" Silas stared at her, his eyes red, his breathing ragged. For a long moment, Clara thought he might say yes, might confirm that he'd already given up, that the fight was over. But then he pulled her into his arms and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. "I don't know how to win this," he whispered against her hair. "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out. Together." They stood there in the kitchen, wrapped around each other, and made a silent agreement. No more talk of giving up. No more pushing each other away. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, even if it destroyed them both. The next morning, Clara woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She'd spent the night lying awake, her mind turning over the problem from every angle. And somewhere around dawn, she'd realized something. Victor Hale had made a mistake. He'd shown his hand too clearly. The systematic way he'd cut off their income, the coordinated pressure on all 5 ranchers, the explicit quid pro quo of his offer, it was all evidence. Maybe not the kind that would hold up in court, but the kind that could turn public opinion. If people knew what he was doing, if they saw the pattern. She found Silas in the barn, mucking out stalls with the kind of mechanical intensity that said he was trying not to think. "I have an idea," she said. He looked up, wary hope in his eyes. "What kind of idea?" "The kind that might get us both run out of town, or might save everything. Hard to say which." "I'm listening." Clara laid it out. They'd write down everything, every incident, every threat, every piece of pressure Victor had applied. They'd make copies and distribute them throughout the county, not just to the sheriff, but to everyone, every ranch, every business, every family. They'd make Victor's tactics public knowledge. And then what? Silas asked. People already know he's ruthless. That's why they're afraid of him. But they don't know the full extent of it. They don't see the pattern. If we show them, if we make it impossible to ignore, maybe some of them will find the courage to stand with us, or at least stop supporting him. Or it'll just make him angrier. Probably. But we're out of options, Silas. We either go down fighting or we go down quiet. I'd rather go down fighting. Silas studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. Anna used to say that sometimes the only way through a problem is straight at it. Smart woman. Yeah, she was. He set down the pitchfork and pulled Clara close. All right, let's do it. Let's go down fighting. They spent the next 2 days writing. Clara had a gift for words, for taking the messy reality of their situation and making it clear and compelling. Silas provided the details, the dates, the evidence. Together, they built a document that was part testimony, part accusation, part plea for justice. They made 30 copies by hand, working late into the night by lamplight. And on the third morning, the morning Victor's deadline expired, they rode out to distribute them. They left copies at the general store, the saloon, the church. They rode to neighboring ranches and pressed them into skeptical hands. They posted them on trees and fences and anywhere people might see them. And then they waited. The reaction came faster than Clara expected. By afternoon, people were talking. Some dismissed it as sour grapes from sore losers. Others read it with growing alarm, seeing their own experiences reflected in the pattern Clara and Silas had documented. And a few, just a few, got angry. That evening, Martin Fletcher showed up at the ranch with Sarah Kemp and the Rodriguez brothers. They all looked determined and terrified in equal measure. We read what you wrote, Martin said. Every word of it. And? Silas asked. And we're not backing down. If Hale wants a fight, he's got one. From all of us. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Even after everything he's done? Especially after everything he's done. You showed us we're not alone in this, that we're all facing the same enemy, and together, maybe we stand a chance. They stood in the yard as the sun set, 5 ranchers and 1 stubborn woman who'd refused to leave, and Clara realized that this was what victory looked like. Not perfect or triumphant, but real. Messy and scared and absolutely determined. Victor Hale had made a mistake. He'd assumed fear was stronger than community. He was about to learn otherwise. The backlash from Victor Hale came swiftly, but not in the way Clara expected. Instead of more cut fences or trampled crops, he went silent. For 3 days, nothing happened. No threats, no visits, no retaliation. Just an eerie quiet that made Clara's nerves stretch tighter with each passing hour. He's planning something, Silas said on the 3rd evening, staring out at the darkening fields. This isn't like him. Maybe our document worked. Maybe he's backing off. Men like Victor don't back off. They regroup. Silas turned to face her. Whatever's coming, it's going to be worse than anything he's done before. He was right. On the 4th morning, Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Not one rider, but many. At least a dozen men on horseback, heading straight for the ranch. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the house. Silas! He was already coming out, rifle in hand, his face set in grim lines. Get inside. Lock the doors. I'm not hiding while you— Clara, please. Just this once, don't argue with me. The fear in his voice stopped her. She nodded and went inside, but she didn't lock the doors. Instead, she positioned herself by the window where she could see everything. The riders pulled up in a semicircle around the yard. Victor Hale sat in the center, flanked by his men. But there were others too, townspeople Clara recognized. The banker, Mr. Ashford, a couple of merchants, even Sheriff Brennan, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Victor dismounted slowly, making a show of it. Mercer, we need to have a conversation. Then talk, Silas said, the rifle held loose but ready. You've been spreading lies about me. Defaming my character, interfering with my business relationships, inciting discord in the community. Victor's voice was calm, almost pleasant. That's a serious matter. I spread the truth. There's a difference. Your version of the truth. which happens to paint me as some kind of villain preying on innocent ranchers. Victor gestured to the men behind him. These gentlemen disagree. They've known me for years. They've done business with me, profited alongside me. And they're here to tell you that your campaign of lies ends now. Mr. Ashford shifted uncomfortably in his saddle but said nothing. The merchants looked away. Only Sheriff Brennan met Silas's eyes, and what Clara saw there made her stomach sink. Resignation. Defeat. I'm giving you one final chance, Victor continued. Retract your statements, publicly apologize for the defamation, and sell me this ranch at a fair price. Do that, and we can all move forward. Refuse, and I'll pursue legal action for slander and property damage. Property damage? Silas's voice rose. You're the one who's been destroying my property. Prove it, Victor smiled. Oh wait, you can't, because all you have are wild accusations and conspiracy theories, whereas I have witnesses who will testify that you've been making threatening statements, acting erratically, possibly mentally unstable from grief. He paused. It would be a shame if the court decided you were unfit to manage your affairs. They might appoint someone to handle your estate. Someone like me. Clara's hands clenched into fists. He was going to try to have Silas declared incompetent. It was brilliant and vicious and probably legal. Silas must have realized it too, because his knuckles went white on the rifle. Get off my land. I'm trying to help you, Mercer, but if you insist on being unreasonable, I said get off my land. Victor's expression hardened. He nodded to his men, and 3 of them dismounted, moving toward Silas with clear intent. Clara was through the door before she could think about it, stepping between Silas and Victor's men with her chin up and her heart hammering. Stop, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. All of you, just stop. Victor raised an eyebrow. Miss Whitmore, how dramatic. You want to know about property damage? Clara pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. I documented everything, dates, times, descriptions. I even sketched the boot prints from our garden and matched them to boots your foreman was wearing when he came here 2 weeks ago. I have fabric samples, witness statements, a complete timeline of harassment. She was bluffing, mostly. She had some of those things, but not all. Not in any form that would hold up in court. But Victor didn't know that. So what? Victor said. You think your little journal is going to stand up against testimony from respected members of the community? I think it'll be enough to create reasonable doubt, enough to make a judge look twice, enough to make people ask questions. Clara took a step forward. And I think you're scared, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be here with 12 men trying to intimidate one rancher into silence. I'm not scared of you. Then why are you here? Why not just let the courts handle it? Why bring an armed escort unless you're worried that people might actually listen to us? She saw it. Just a flicker, uncertainty crossing Victor's face. Around them, some of the townspeople were shifting uncomfortably. The merchants were whispering to each other. Even Mr. Ashford looked troubled. You know what I think? Claire continued, her voice rising. I think you've been doing this for years. Pressuring people, destroying anyone who won't bend, and nobody's called you on it because they're too scared. Well, I'm not scared anymore, and neither is Silas. So unless you have actual legal papers to serve, I suggest you leave, now. Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually order his men to attack, but then Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat. She's got a point, Victor. If you've got a legal case, take it to court. But this here looks more like intimidation than anything else. Victor's eyes snapped to the sheriff. You work for me. I work for the county, and right now you're trespassing on private property with what looks like intent to threaten. Brennan's voice was quiet but firm. So maybe you should move along before I have to make this official. The tension in the yard was thick enough to choke on. Clara could see Victor calculating, weighing his options. He was powerful, yes, but he wasn't stupid, and a public confrontation with the sheriff on his side wouldn't look good no matter how much influence he had. Finally, Victor smiled, cold and sharp. All right, we'll do this your way. I'll see you in court, Mercer, both of you. He mounted his horse and rode off, his men following. But as they left, Clara saw him look back at her with an expression that promised this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When they were gone, Sheriff Brennan lingered. He dismounted and walked over to where Silas and Clara stood. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said. Probably both, Clara admitted. Brennan looked at Silas. He's going to come at you legally now, file for damages, slander, maybe try to get a court order to seize the property for unpaid debts. I paid the debts. Jack Morrison's loan covered it. For now, but if Victor can tie you up in court long enough, keep you from earning, bleed you dry with legal fees. Brennan shook his head. He doesn't have to win. He just has to outlast you. So what do we do? Silas asked. You get yourself a lawyer, a good one, and you find more evidence. Real evidence, not just suspicions and boot prints. Brennan mounted his horse. I'll do what I can from my end. Look into some of the complaints, see if I can find anything concrete. But you need to understand, Victor's got friends in high places. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Clara said. Brennan almost smiled. No, I suppose not. Good luck to you both. He rode off, leaving them alone in the yard. Silas pulled Clara into his arms, holding her so tight it almost hurt. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched, he said against her hair. Which part? All of it. You stepping in front of armed men, calling Victor's bluff, standing there like you weren't scared at all. I was terrified. I know, that's what made it so brave. He pulled back to look at her. You're incredible, you know that? I'm stubborn. That too. He kissed her forehead. But we still have a problem. Victor is going to tie us up in legal battles we can't afford. And even if we win, the cost might destroy us anyway. Clara had been thinking about that, about money and lawyers and time they didn't have, and she'd realized something. We need to find his other victims, she said, not just the ranchers, everyone he's ever pressured or threatened or destroyed. If we can show a pattern of behavior going back years, it stops being, she said, and starts being a criminal enterprise. That could take weeks, months. Then we have months. However long it takes. She looked up at him. You said you wanted to fight. So let's fight, really fight. Not just to save the ranch, but to stop him from ever doing this to anyone else. Silas studied her face, something like wonder in his eyes. When did you get so fierce? The day I decided to stay. Clara smiled. Now come on, we've got work to do. They started that afternoon. Clara made a list of every person she'd heard about who might have crossed paths with Victor Hale, every failed business, every foreclosed ranch, every family that had left the area under mysterious circumstances. Then she and Silas started tracking them down. Some were still in the area, bitter and broken. Others had moved on, trying to rebuild elsewhere. A few had died, their stories lost except for whispers and rumors. But slowly, carefully, Clara and Silas built a case. They collected testimonies, documented patterns, mapped out years of systematic intimidation and economic warfare. And what they found was worse than they'd imagined. Victor Hale hadn't just been pressuring a few ranchers. He'd been doing it for over a decade, targeting anyone who stood between him and land he wanted. At least 15 families had lost their property to him. Dozens more had sold under duress. And in every case, the same tactics: cut fences, scattered livestock, economic pressure, legal threats. This is bigger than us, Silas said one night, staring at the evidence spread across their kitchen table. This is a pattern of criminal activity going back years. Which means, if we can prove it, Victor doesn't just lose a court case, he loses everything. If we can prove it, that's a big if. Clara knew he was right. They had testimonies, but many of the witnesses were scared to come forward. They had documentation, but much of it was circumstantial. They needed something concrete, something Victor couldn't deny or explain away. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson showed up at the ranch one Sunday morning, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. I have something for you, she said, pressing a ledger into Clara's hands. It's from when Victor bought out the Thompsons 5 years ago. I kept the records because something felt off about the sale. The Thompsons were doing fine one month, desperate to sell the next. It didn't make sense. Clara opened the ledger and started reading. What she found made her blood run cold. Victor had systematically cut off the Thompsons' credit with every merchant in town. No feed, no supplies, no way to maintain their operation. Then he'd offered to buy them out at a fraction of the property's value. The ledger showed the coordination, notes about which merchants had agreed to participate, how much Victor had paid them for their cooperation, the timeline of the squeeze. It was proof. Real, undeniable proof of conspiracy and fraud. "Why are you giving this to me?" Clara asked. Mrs. Patterson's expression was complicated, guilt and defiance and something that might have been hope. "Because I was one of the merchants who took his money. I helped destroy the Thompsons, and I've regretted it ever since. I can't undo that, but maybe I can stop it from happening again." Clara squeezed her hand. "Thank you. This could change everything." "I know. That's why I'm terrified." Mrs. Patterson pulled away. "If Victor finds out I gave you this—" "He won't. Not from us." "Make sure it counts then. Make sure my betrayal of him is worth it." After she left, Clara showed the ledger to Silas. They sat together in stunned silence, both understanding the magnitude of what they held. "This is it," Silas said finally. "This is what we need. We should take it to Sheriff Brennan, let him handle it officially." But before they could act, fate intervened in a way neither of them expected. That night, a fire broke out in Victor Hale's barn. Clara and Silas woke to the glow on the horizon, the smell of smoke carried on the wind. They rushed outside and saw the orange flames licking the sky miles away, in the direction of the Triple H ranch. "Should we?" Clara started. "No." Silas's voice was firm. "Whatever's happening over there isn't our concern. We stay here, we protect what's ours, and we let Brennan handle it." But the next morning, they learned what had happened. Victor's barn had burned to the ground, taking most of his winter feed with it. And in the chaos of fighting the fire, someone had broken into his office and stolen documents, financial records, land deeds, contracts, all gone. The sheriff came by late that afternoon, his expression grim. "Victor's claiming you two had something to do with it," Brennan said. "We were here all night," Silas said. "You can ask any of our neighbors. They would have seen us ride out if we'd gone anywhere." "I figured as much, but I had to ask." Brennan hesitated. "Between you and me, I don't think you did it, but somebody did, and Victor's gunning for blood." "Do you have any leads?" Clara asked. "A few. Some of his own men look suspicious. There's been talk of unpaid wages, resentment building. Could be an inside job." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "But there's something else. Whoever broke into his office left one document behind. On purpose, looks like. A ledger showing payments to various merchants for cooperation in driving competitors out of business." Clara's heart leapt. Someone else had found the same evidence Mrs. Patterson had provided, or maybe they'd found something even more damning. "What are you going to do?" Silas asked. "My job. Investigate the arson and investigate the fraud. Both crimes are serious, and if the ledger is authentic—" Brennan met Silas's eyes. "Then Victor Hale is going to have a lot more to worry about than a property dispute with you." After Brennan left, Clara and Silas sat on the porch and watched the sun set. "Someone helped us," Clara said quietly. "Someone burned his barn and stole his records. I know. Do you think it was one of the other ranchers, Fletcher or Sarah?" "Could have been anyone. Could have been someone we don't even know." Silas took her hand. "Part of me wants to find out who, thank them. But another part thinks maybe it's better not to know." "Why?" "Because what they did was illegal, dangerous. If Victor finds out who it was, he'll destroy them. Better if it stays a mystery." Clara thought about that. About anonymous justice and debts that couldn't be repaid. About how sometimes the right thing looked a lot like the wrong thing from certain angles. "Whoever it was," she said, "they gave us a chance. We should make it count." The next morning, Clara and Silas took Mrs. Patterson's ledger to Sheriff Brennan. Combined with whatever evidence had been recovered from Victor's office, it painted a devastating picture of systematic fraud and intimidation. Brennan called in a federal marshal. The marshal brought in more investigators. And within a week, Victor Hale was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, criminal intimidation, and arson. The latter because evidence suggested he'd burned his own barn to destroy records and frame Silas. The trial took months. Clara and Silas testified, along with the Fletchers, Sarah Kemp, the Rodriguez brothers, and a dozen other victims who finally found the courage to come forward. Mrs. Patterson testified too, her voice shaking but clear as she detailed her role in the conspiracy and Victor's methods. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Victor Hale was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all his victims. His ranch was seized and sold at auction to cover the debts, and the community he'd terrorized for over a decade finally breathed free. It should have felt like victory, and in many ways, it did. But Clara also felt exhausted, wrung out, like she'd been fighting for so long that she'd forgotten how to stand down. The day after the trial ended, she and Silas walked through the garden together. The roses had finally taken root, sending up new green shoots that would bloom come spring. The wildflowers were thriving. The space that had been dead and overgrown was alive again. "We did it," Silas said quietly. "Yeah, we did." "So why don't I feel better?" Clara leaned against him. "Because winning isn't the same as healing. We saved the ranch, we stopped Victor, we got justice. But we're both still carrying everything that happened, all the fear and anger and exhaustion. That doesn't just disappear. How do we get past it? Same way we got through it, one day at a time, together." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a simple ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "My mother gave it to Anna. After she died, I couldn't look at it. Couldn't touch it without feeling like I was drowning. But last night, I took it out, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It just felt like a promise." He turned to face Clara fully. "You told me to ask again after we won. Well, we won. So I'm asking. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my reason to keep fighting?" Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They married a month later in a small ceremony on the ranch with their friends as witnesses. Martin Fletcher walked Clara down the aisle, such as it was, a path through the garden lined with wildflowers. Sarah Kemp stood as Clara's witness. Jack Morrison stood for Silas, grinning like he'd known this was coming all along. Sheriff Brennan officiated, reading the words with surprising gentleness. And when he got to the part about speaking now or forever holding peace, Mrs. Patterson called out, "About time!" and everyone laughed. The kiss was sweet and sure, full of promise and hard-won hope. And when they turned to face their friends, Clara saw the future stretched out before them. Not perfect, not easy, but real and theirs. The ranch prospered slowly. It took years to rebuild what had been lost, to heal the damage Victor had done. But with Jack's continued support, with the cooperation of the other ranchers, with Clara's fierce determination and Silas's quiet strength, they made it work. The garden became Clara's pride and joy. She grew roses in every color, just like Anna had, but she also grew her own flowers, lavender and daisies and black-eyed Susans that spread wild and beautiful. The space became a testament to both past and present, honoring what had been while making room for what was. Silas learned to talk about Anna and Emma without breaking. He told Clara stories about them, shared memories, kept their photographs on the mantle. And Clara listened and loved him through it, understanding that grief and love could coexist, that honoring the past didn't mean being trapped by it. 2 years after the trial, Sarah Kemp married one of the Rodriguez brothers in a wedding that brought the whole community together. Martin Fletcher retired and sold his ranch to a young couple from Denver, staying on as an advisor and unofficial grandfather to their children. Mrs. Patterson never fully forgave herself for her role in Victor's schemes, but she became a fierce advocate for fairness in business practices, refusing to extend credit to anyone who used economic pressure as a weapon. And Jack Morrison visited twice a year, always bringing gifts and stories and the kind of friendship that didn't need constant maintenance to stay strong. As for Clara and Silas, they built a life that was messy and beautiful and entirely their own. Some years were good, bumper crops, mild winters, enough money to make improvements. Some years were hard, drought, disease, setbacks that tested everything they'd built, but they faced it all together. 3 years after their wedding, Claire stood in the garden at sunset, one hand on her rounded belly, watching Silas repair a fence post. He caught her looking and smiled, that slow, rare smile that still made her heart skip. "What?" he called. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" "About how I almost left. That first day when you told me to go, I almost listened." Silas walked over, placing his hand over hers on her belly. "What stopped you?" "Stubbornness." "Thank heaven for that." Clara laughed. "You mean thank heaven for my complete inability to take no for an answer?" "Exactly." He kissed her temple. "You saved me, you know. I was drowning, and you threw me a rope, forced me to grab it, even when I didn't want to." "We saved each other," Clara corrected. "You gave me a home, a purpose, a life that matters. And you gave me a reason to live again." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the garden around them, flowers bloomed in wild profusion. The house behind them glowed with lamplight and warmth, and somewhere in the distance they could hear Martin Fletcher calling to his neighbor, the sound of community and connection. It wasn't perfect. The ranch still struggled sometimes. Money was still tight. There were days when the weight of everything they'd been through threatened to crush them both. But there were also mornings when Clara woke to find Silas watching her with wonder in his eyes. Evenings when they sat on the porch and planned their future, their child's future, the legacy they were building together. Moments when the hard things fell away and all that remained was the simple, stubborn love they'd fought so hard to protect. That night, as they lay in bed with Silas's hand resting on Clara's belly and their baby kicking beneath his palm, Clara said, "Do you ever regret it? Writing that letter? Starting this whole thing?" "Every day I regret that I almost sent you away," Silas said. "But I've never once regretted that you stayed. Even when I'm being stubborn and impossible?" "Especially then." Clara smiled in the dark. Outside, the wind whispered through the roses, carrying their scent through the open window. In a few months, their child would be born into this house, this life, this love that had been forged in fire and fear and refusing to give up. And Clara knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that everything they'd been through, every fight, every fear, every moment when giving up seemed easier than holding on, had been worth it. Because this was what victory looked like. Not a moment of triumph, but a lifetime of choosing each other. Not perfection, but persistence. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning. The roses bloomed that spring, filling the garden with color and fragrance. Clara and Silas walked through them together, her hand in his, their daughter asleep in a sling against Clara's chest. The baby had Silas's dark hair and Clara's stubborn chin, and she'd been born screaming her defiance at the world in a way that made both her parents laugh through their tears. They'd named her Anna Rose, honoring the past while claiming the future. Martin Fletcher stopped by that afternoon, bringing a hand-carved cradle he'd made in his workshop. Sarah and her husband brought preserves and bread. Jack sent a letter from Denver full of congratulations and promises to visit soon. That evening, after everyone had left and the baby was asleep in her cradle, Clara and Silas sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of fire and hope. "We made it," Clara said softly. "We did." "Think we can keep making it?" Silas pulled her close, kissing her hair. "I think we can try, and trying is all that matters." In the garden, the roses swayed in the breeze, some white like Anna's had been, some pink like Clara had chosen, all of them growing together in a tangle of past and present that was somehow more beautiful for being messy and real. And as the last light faded from the sky, Clara thought about that first morning when she'd stepped off the wagon with nothing but stubbornness and hope. About how Silas had tried to send her away and she'd refused to go. About all the fights and fears and impossible choices that had brought them here. She wouldn't change a single moment, because this life, this love, this family they'd built from broken pieces, this was worth everything. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of their daughter's soft breathing, the creak of the porch swing, Silas humming an old tune under his breath, replaced by the sound of living. And that, Clara thought, was the only victory that mattered.